I also seize the opportunity offered to me here to thank all our bilateral, multilateral, and private technical and financial partners who have been supporting us or who have promised to support us in the future. I should also like to invite those who have not yet done so to take the decision to join us and to support us in our reconstruction and in consolidating our economic, social, and security fabric. President, ladies and gentlemen, the people of our countries, whether they be rich or poor, powerful or weak, need a safe, peaceful world where they can all live serenely and fully exercise their rights. However, the Sahel region today is a hotbed of armed groups who are holding sway throughout the world. These groups are a threat, not only upon the security of this region, but also upon the security of the rest of the world. If nothing is done to come to their aid decisively and urgently in the countries of this region, we run the risk of a resurgence of terrorism in the countries of the Gulf of Guinea, and then in the rest of the world, starting in Europe, which is the closest continent to Africa. No precautions or prevention measures will prevent terrorism from then crossing the Atlantic if the Sahel is abandoned. And nothing at all will be able to stop the youth in the Sahel countries and its surroundings from giving in to the temptation of perilous immigrations to Europe through the Sahara and the Mediterranean if this youth has no longer any hope by staying at home. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Sahel is facing many afflictions due to terrorism and has become an arena for sterile rivalry and greed, which are exacerbating this situation. Rather than just looking at this bleak spectacle, the countries of the Sahara rather require solidarity and assistance, but not just any assistance and aid. This is the kind of assistance which allows us to move away from aid killing aid in a way and this is the kind of assistance which is in line with our convictions and respects our dignity. President, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I should like once again to invite all those in the international community to exhibit greater solidarity to one another. This is the best way to meet the challenges we face in our time and to preserve the interests of all. Raoul Follereau said that nobody has the right to be happy alone. So let us ensure that there are no more ill-fed, uneducated children, that there are no young people without training and without jobs, that there are no longer those living in rural areas without lands allowing them to live with dignity, that there are no longer workers who are oppressed and lose their rights, that abundance for some does not mean lean years for others, that force does not prevail over truth and justice, and finally, that our selfishness never predominates over dignity for humankind and for all peoples. I can assure you that Burkina Faso will spare no efforts to provide its contribution to building a better, more peaceful and prosperous world in solidarity. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Faso, Head of State, President of the Council of Ministers of Burkina Faso for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Nikos Anastasiadis, President of the Republic of Cyprus, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Nikos Anastasiadis, President of the Republic of Cyprus, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with only a few months left of my 10-year tenure in office, I stand before you to address the plenary session of the General Assembly for the very last time. I would have wished nothing more than for this address to have been a reflection of positive developments in what humanity has had to face or is facing. Like all of you, I would like to have applauded the results of the implementation either of the provisions of the UN Charter or of the decisions and resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council, which would have assured that any threats or attempts to bring into question the sovereignty, territorial integrity of any UN member state had been brought to a complete halt or minimized. That long-standing conflicts, disputes have been resolved or were in the process of being resolved in accordance always with the decisions and resolutions of the United Nations. That the need for the organization's reform would have led to the effective prevention of new threats and challenges to world peace. That through its new role, the UN would have implemented projects to effectively combat hunger and to improve the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people in dire need of aid. That the number of refugees and migrants forced to flee from their homes due to conflict or poverty would have been greatly reduced. That further, we would have been able to tackle social and economic exclusion, lack of adequate healthcare standards, and shortage of educational opportunities. That sustainable development would have finally become a reality of all countries and regions in need by establishing the necessary political and socio-economic conditions which led to stability, economic growth, and institution building. That measures for the prevention of climate change and its devastating consequences would have been implemented consistently by all parties involved. That terrorism and religious fundamentalism would have given way to tolerance and understanding. That the trillions of dollars spent on destructive weapons would instead have been spent on actions and programs aiming to bridge the gap between rich and poor states. And finally, that multilateralism would have been the guiding doctrine of all states. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in addressing the General Assembly in 2018 and referring to the weakness of dealing with the same problems, I had wondered, and I'm quoting, how is it then that we come back again and again, year after year, as a kind of ritual, to attest to the dismal lack of effectiveness for some and the embellishment attempt for others, for what is in fact our inability to fulfill the aims of the UN Charter. And I was continuing, why do the decisions of the Security Council remain in their overwhelming majority sheer certificates attesting violations? Why is international law and international agreements not implemented? Why do strategies and programs aiming at creating better conditions for people that are suffering remain wishful thinking? Esteemed friends, although I'm well aware that what I am about to say is well known to all of you, for the sake of history, I cannot but relay some truths which are leading to a declining path and gradual loss of credibility of the United Nations, an organization which was formed right after the Second World War to prevent new disasters, provide protection and hope to those in need of effective protection and action against all the challenges I have already mentioned. I know that what I'm saying may be outside the bounds of diplomatic etiquette, but I do believe that the obligation of each leader before history is not to overlook failings and shortcomings in favor of wishful thinking or flattery. That is why I will proceed with a review not just of the reasons which have transformed the organization into a repository of problems, but also to what states are required to do in order to provide credibility to the organization, as well as the ability to effectively impose international legal order or to consistently implement decisions and programs for the benefit of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, the weakness and inefficiencies of the United Nations is due to, first, the fact that the international law is preceded by financial or other interests of powerful member states. Second, that despite the end of the Cold War, alliances based on common interest lead to tolerance towards states which violate international law if the offender is under their sphere of influence. Third, the resurgence of hegemonic tendencies by some states with the aim of creating new empires at the expense of smaller states and in violation of international law. Fourth, despite the declared intention of the Secretary General of the United Nations to proceed with the much needed reform and modernization, as well as its modus operandi and decision-making process, the lack of willingness on the part of the aforementioned states has not allowed for the implementation of such a change. And fifth, as a result of the same political expediencies, the United Nations, unfortunately, adopts an equal distance stance even when faced with the violation of decisions, resolutions, and defined scope and terms of reference specified to the Secretariat. This, my dear friends, results in emboldening offending states which not only disregard international law, but also create new precedents outside the framework of legality. Mr. President, I have set out the main reasons for the lack of effectiveness and also the weakness of the UN to live up to the expectations of billions of people. I know I may be considered as a romantic ideologist, but I believe that recent events and problems affecting the world do not leave any choice other than the taking bold but necessary decisions, such as identification of the causes that lead to unnecessary rivalries and conflicts and renewal of our commitment to a global order based on international law. A global order which ensures that peace, security, human rights, and sustainable development remains the highest values which we undertake to preserve and hold. B, political will and determination to proceed with the reform and modernization of the UN to a just and efficient multilateral governance system. And this reform and modernization process becomes even more imperative and urgent with the imminent danger after 77 years of a new world war following the Russian aggression and the illegal invasion of Russia to Ukraine. Distinguished friends, my reference to the need for reforms, to the structure and implementation mechanism of decision taken by the UN, does not only arise from my assessment as to other international problems, but also from what my country still endures and suffers as a result of the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974. It is with deep disappointment that I heard President Erdogan claiming that, and I quote, "As Turkey, we want all issues in the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean to be solved with the framework of good neighborly relations and in conformity with international law." How ironic is it for the Turkish president to put forward such a claim when every day he threatens to overtake Greek islands, or when he commits thousands of violations of the airspace of the sovereign and neighboring country contrary to international law? How even more provocative is it to express the desire to resolve disputes in conformity with international law when he refuses to implement numerous resolutions of the United Nations on the Cyprus problem and creates new fait accompli? How much in conformity with international law is his refusal to abide by A, the General Assembly Resolution 3212 adopted in October 1974, which urges the speedy withdrawal of all foreign armed forces and foreign military presence and personnel from the Republic of Cyprus, and the cessation of all foreign interest in its affairs, interference in its affairs. B, a resolution which, endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 365 in December of the same year. C, the Security Council Resolution 1251 of 1999, which reaffirmed its position that Cyprus settlement must be based on a state of Cyprus with a single sovereignty, international personality, and a single citizenship, with its independence and territorial integrity safeguarded in a bizonal, bicommunal federation. It also stressed that such a settlement must exclude union in whole or in part with any other country or any form of partition or cessation. Mr. Erdogan last year claimed that efforts should concentrate on reaching a settlement based on the so-called realities on the ground, whilst this year he spoke about the need for everyone to see the truth and that there are two distinct states and two distinct peoples on the island today. And I am wondering, dear friends, as to which truth is he talking about. The truth that 37% of the territory of the Republic of Cyprus, an UN and EU member state, remains under military occupation. Excuse me. The truth that after the Turkish invasion of 1974, 1/3 of the Greek Cypriots were forced to leave their ancestral homes. The truth that they have implanted hundreds of thousands of Turkish nationals to the occupied areas, thus altering the demographic character of the island, turning the Turkish Cypriot community into a minority in the areas they illegally occupy. The truth that Turkey has established an illegal entity in the occupied areas which is under its absolute political, economic, social, cultural, and religious control. An illegal entity, bear in mind, described by the European Court of Human Rights as a subordinate local administration of Turkey. Another question, the truth that Turkey tries to equate the state, the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus, with the illegal secession entity. The truth that the above proclamation of the purported secession had been condemned by the Security Council and considered legally invalid. The truth that the Security Council called for its reversal, and for all states and the international community as a whole not to accept it or in any way assist it. The truth that they are trying to change the status of the fenced city of Famagusta, contrary to the UN Council resolutions 550 and 789. The truth that Turkey adopts its own arbitrary interpretation of international law, which reduces the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus by 44% at the expense of both Greek and Turkish Cypriots, contrary to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as I have noted earlier, when decisions or resolutions based on international law are not to be implemented or enforced, then these, rightly so, could be perceived as fostering or even rewarding arbitrariness. This is actually what we are witnessing today with the Cyprus problem. Turkey, which systematically violates international law, calls on the international community to recognize its illegal fait accompli. Esteemed friends, unfortunately, this was the long-standing aim of Turkey ever since 1956. That is why, despite historical compromises by the Greek Cypriot side, all efforts on reaching a settlement of the Cyprus problem failed as a result of the intransigent stance and irrational demands of Turkey. The latest example being the conference on Cyprus held at Grand Montana in July 2017, during which, as regards the internal aspects of the Cyprus problem, the UN Secretary General assessed in his report on 28 September 2017 that and I quote, the core outstanding issues related to governance and power sharing remained few, and that by the time the conference closed, the sides had essentially solved the key issues of effective participation. Thus, while the aim of the Secretary General to reach a strategic agreement was within close reach, the reason of their successful outcome was Turkey's inflexible stance and insistence on maintaining the anachronistic Treaty of Guarantee, the right of intervention, and the permanent presence of troops. And I would like, dear friends, to recall the UN Secretary General's statement of June 2017, in which he stressed that progress in this chapter of security and guarantees is an essential element in reaching an overall agreement. Following a period of stalemate, and despite our disappointment, we undertook new initiative to resume the process from where it was let off at Grand Montana, culminating to the joint understanding reached with the UN Secretary General and the then Turkish Cypriot leader on November 25th, 2019, which reaffirmed the principles for the resumption of a new round of talks, namely the joint declaration of 11 February 2014, the prior convergences, and the six-point framework the UN Secretary General presents at Grand Montana. Regrettably, once again, Turkey undermined the prospect of resuming the negotiating process, and instead, in the meeting held in Geneva in April 2021, they presented their position for changing the agreed basis of a settlement from a federal solution to a two-state solution. Dear friends, nonetheless, our side undertook another initiative, which also led to a new joint meeting of the leaders of the two communities with the Secretary General in September last year, during which it was agreed that the Secretary General would proceed with the appointment of an envoy in order to deliberate with both sides and all interested parties so as to reach common ground for a new peace process to resume. Excuse me. Yet again, Turkey refused to uphold the said agreement. We also continue taking initiatives to break the impasse through a letter I had sent to the Turkish Cypriot leader in May 23 this year, by which I conveyed constructive proposals for the adoption of bold confidence building measures, of win-win confidence building measures, measures which unfortunately were immediately rejected by the Turkish Cypriot side, which submitted counter proposals in line with their aim for a two-state solution. Based on the above mentioned, I believe that it's clear that the Greek Cypriot community has exerted and will continue to exert every possible effort for the resumption of the talks in order to reach a settlement based on the United Nations resolutions. And as I have emphasized, the only way forward in resolving conflicts and for peace to prevail is none other than the unwavering adherence to international law and the UN Charter, not as arbitrarily interpreted by those who seek to disguise their revisionist aspiration. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, during my 10-year tenure, I might not have been able to enjoy what the vast majority would have also wished: the necessary reforms of the international organization, the resolution of international conflicts, and tackling challenges that affect hundreds of millions of people, such as hunger, poverty, and climate change. I might have not been able to see my homeland reunited with my Greek and Turkish Cypriot compatriots living in conditions of peace, prosperity, and stability. However, I earnestly hope that during my lifetime, I will be able to witness a better and more stable future for humanity. Thank you for your understanding.
En nombre de la Asamblea, agradezco al presidente de la República de Chipre la declaración.
On behalf of the Assembly, I should like to thank His Excellency for the statement we have just heard, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Nike Vurobaravu, President of the Republic of Vanuatu. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
En nombre de la Asamblea General.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Nike Vurobaravu, President of the Republic of Vanuatu, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, it is my great honor and privilege to speak for the first time as the President of the Republic of Vanuatu in this important body, the United Nations General Assembly. Let me start by congratulating His Excellency Saba Korosi on assuming the presidency of the 77th session of the General Assembly. I assure you that during your tenure, my delegation will work closely with you to implement the agenda you set in this session. Mr. President, your vision for the United Nations 77th General Assembly is fitting to address the myriad of global issues that confront us today. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to His Excellency Abdullah Shahid for his stellar leadership as the President of Hope of the 76th session during an unprecedented and tumultuous year. Your inspiring work for humanity has left a strong impression here at the United Nations and around the world. Mr. President, today the world is facing a profusion of mounting challenges, many of which are inextricably linked. We are slowly recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, but recovery is becoming ever more difficult with rising debt levels and the looming inflation caused by the supply chain disruptions and rise of prices of fuel and food resulting from the Russia-Ukraine crisis. These challenges pose a major risk of global recessions and add to the rising humanitarian crisis that we have already faced with. As we gathered here, more families around the world are finding it extremely difficult to put food on the table, pay their bills and rent, and to meet the basic necessities. These hardships can be avoided by deploying smarter diplomacy and appropriate macroeconomic policies. These challenges are more harder compounded by an existential climate crisis that is already devastating our economies and our ecosystems. Over the past years, we have witnessed record heat, wildfires, severe hurricanes, coral bleaching, rising sea levels, prolonged droughts, and record floodings. The global challenge that we are facing impacts the poor and the vulnerable the hardest. Without adequate basic social safety nets and fundamental human rights protection, their future is uncertain. Mr. President, every day we are experiencing the debilitating consequences of the climate crisis, and the world is now demanding more ambitious action on climate at every level. This emergency is of our own making, is now affecting all people, those from the poorest to the richest nations. No one is immune to the extreme weather events now ravaging our islands, cities, and states. No one can escape the rising tides. Our youth are terrified of the future world we are handing to them through expanding fossil fuel dependency, compromising intergenerational trust and equity. Mr. President, fundamental human rights are being violated as we begin measuring climate change, not in degrees of Celsius or tons of carbon, but in human lives. The time is up. Action is required now. And that is why the nations of the Blue Pacific continent are leading a global initiative to bring climate change to the International Court of Justice, the only principal UN organ that has not yet been given an opportunity to weigh in on the climate crisis. We believe that bringing climate change to the ICJ is a global public good and will further support the progressive development of international law. In this very hall, working in solidarity with UN member countries, we will ask the ICJ for an advisory opinion on existing obligations under international law to protect the rights of present and future generations against the adverse impacts of climate change. We believe that legal clarity from the world's highest court will help to spur even greater climate action and strengthen the Paris Agreement. We believe in the norms and rule of international law, and we firmly believe that our existing international laws and conventions already contain critical protections for human rights and for the environment. Taking climate change to the ICJ via the General Assembly is not a silver bullet for increasing climate action, but only one tool to get us closer to the end goal for a safe planet for humanity. The leader of the Pacific Islands community to continue to demonstrate higher levels of climate ambition and collective action. That is why, beyond the ICJ, we are supporting several other tools to battle the existential threat of climate change. We call on states to join the group of nations proposing to include the crime of ecocide in the Rome Statutes. Acting with knowledge of severe and widespread or long-term damage to the environment can no longer be tolerated. The future of tomorrow, we are the guardians of that future. I acknowledge, congratulate, and commend the work of the Commission of the Small Islands States led by Antigua and Barbuda, Tuvalu and Palau to bring the issue of climate change as it relates to the law of the sea to the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. We call for the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to phase down coal, oil, and gas production in line with 1.5 degrees Celsius and enable a global just transition for every worker, community, and nation with fossil fuel dependence. It is critical that states must revise and enhance their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, as Vanuatu has completed last month, as we agreed in the Glasgow Pact at COP26. As you see, we are leaving no stones unturned as we seek solution to this climate crisis. And I particularly call on member states to support Vanuatu and our global coalition as we bring an ICJ climate change resolution before the General Assembly this season. Mr. President, the nuclear risk still remains and presents an existential threat for human species and all forms of life that inhabits the Earth. The nuclear risk is becoming even greater given the Ukraine-Russia war and the intense geopolitical tensions rapidly evolving before us. The lack of consensus on the recent non-proliferation treaty review makes it difficult to achieve nuclear disarmament. This division reveals that the NPT as a central pillar of international rules-based pillar is not seen as a priority by certain nuclear powers. This is a major cause of concern for our planet. Mr. President, just like most countries in the world, my country, Vanuatu, was affected by COVID-19 pandemic. Our economy is heavily dependent on tourism, and this was halted when the borders were closed. Our economic activity significantly declined, and households' livelihoods were severely affected. We have been fortunate that the labor mobility programs that we enjoy with Australia and New Zealand has allowed Vanuatu to export these services, enabling remittance flows that has helped household income and boosted our economy. Furthermore, since most of the population resides in the rural areas, the subsistence economy has been able to sustain the livelihoods of our population. To avert economic decline and social hardships, the government responded by implementing stimulus packages that targeted household incomes and provided finance to the business sector to keep their businesses afloat. The government has been able to do this because of accumulation of budget surpluses over the years. The government launched a nationwide COVID-19 pandemic program allowing distributions of essential supplies before COVID reached Vanuatu, and as a result, only a few deaths were experienced. And as such, the vaccines rate, as soon as vaccine rates reach 70% of the total population, the borders were reopened. On this note, and on behalf of the government and people of Vanuatu, I would like to convey my gratitude to all our bilateral and multilateral partners that have assisted Vanuatu during this very difficult time. The COVID-19 taught us a few lessons, one of which is that the need to ensure that digital inclusion is prioritized in all our economies. As soon as our schools were closed in Vanuatu, it was difficult for many students to have online classes due to the lack of connectivity. I am sure that this is not only a phenomenon experienced in Vanuatu, but in other developing countries as well. This is why I believe digitalization requires a concerted global response and action. Without it, the many goals spelled out in the 2030 agenda may not be realized. Vanuatu is gradually recovering from COVID-19 and tropical cyclone. Borders are opened and tourism is starting to bounce back. As stands, we are poised for economic growth of 2% in 2022. This recovery, however, is undermined by inflationary pressures posed by by rising prices, fuel and food. This recovery is also threatened by climate change and severe weather patterns as Vanuatu is about to enter into the cyclone season. Vanuatu's Category 5 cyclones are becoming a new norm. Mr. President, Vanuatu's fragile economic recovery is a story that situation not only unique to Vanuatu, but one that is familiar to most small island developing states, SEEDs, and other developing countries. Our economic recovery would require not only the domestic policies that will spur growth and build resilience, but which would also require complementary bilateral support measures. One way to do this is to ensure that SEEDs can have access to concessional financing. As we all know, the current international financial architecture and the criterion for concessional criterion for is inconsistent with current economic realities the SEEDs are facing. However, I am delighted to see that the Alliance of Small Island States are working with other United Nations members to craft a multi-dimensional vulnerability index with a view to access concessional financing. I join other leaders on calling on all UN members and in particular the development partners to support this very important initiative. Mr. President, our large blue ocean space has and will continue to present more complex issues that will affect the way we manage our people's livelihood. The 2050 strategy of the Blue Pacific continent sets out our region's long-term vision and aspirations, our North Star and guide to sustain a healthy, wealthy, and prosperous future for our generations to come. At this juncture, one issue that remains gratuitously complex since the birth of our nation is the unjustifiable and continuous colonial claim over our traditional sovereign waters. The rights of the indigenous people and their entire territorial waters within our region must be retained and installed in order to enable a sovereign state to shoulder and manage the ever-rising complexity for which the blue ocean space brings forth. In this context, the major security and political issue for my country, Vanuatu, remains the illegal claim of the Matthew and Hunter Islands. Mr. President, with human rights principles being so well embedded in the UN Charter, and despite countless pleas here in this august body, human rights violations continue globally across sovereign and disputed spaces. Here and across the wider Blue Pacific is no different. Drawing inspiration from the Secretary General's opening statement on Tuesday, global report cards will continue to remind our community that more still remains to be done. Mr. President, in closing, worsened by the deterioration in law and order in many areas around the world, the challenges before us are a somber reminder that we are still failing short from achieving the ideals envisioned by the UN Charter. The United Nations, as the heartbeat of multilateralism and global cooperation, remains well placed to address these challenges. I know that it can be done, but only if we trust one another and work together for the betterment of our common humanity. Our children are watching. Their future is in our hands. The time to act and lead is now. Thank you all for your attention.
En nombre de la Asamblea, agradezco al
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Vanuatu for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
En nombre de la Asamblea General.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Your Excellency Chaba Korochi, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads and members of delegations, may the peace of God be upon you. I am addressing you today on behalf of more than 14 million Palestinians whose fathers and ancestors have lived the tragic Nakba 74 years ago, and they are still living the spillovers of this Nakba. which is a humiliation for the whole humanity, and especially for those who have conspired, planned, and executed this heinous crime. More than 5 million Palestinians have been living under the Israeli military occupation for more than 54 years. And I would like to tell you today, on behalf of the Palestinians, whom I am proud to belong to, that our trust in the possibility of achieving a peace based on justice and international law is unfortunately regressing because of the Israeli occupation policies. Do you want, ladies and gentlemen, to smother whatever hope we still have? It is clear, ladies and gentlemen, that Israel, which is ignoring the resolutions of the international legitimacy, has decided not to be our partner in the peace process. It has undermined the Oslo Accords, which it had signed with the PLO. It has and still is, through its current policies, which are premeditated and deliberate, destroying the two-state solution. This proves unequivocally that Israel does not believe in peace. It believes in imposing a status quo by force and by aggression. Therefore, we do not have an Israeli partner anymore to whom we can talk. Israel is thus ending its contractual relation with us. And it is making the relationship between the state of Palestine and Israel a relationship between an occupying state and an occupied people, nothing more. Therefore, we will only deal with Israel as such, and we call upon the international community to deal with it as such as well. Israel has chosen that itself. We did not make that choice. Israel made that choice. Israel is launching a frantic campaign to confiscate our lands, to build settlements, to loot our resources, as if this land is empty and has no owners, exactly as it did in 1948. Israel is giving total freedom to the army and to the terrorist settlers who are killing the Palestinian people in broad daylight, looting their land and their water, burning and demolishing their homes, compelling them to pay for the demolition, or forcing them to destroy their homes with their own hands and uproot their trees. All this with an official protection. Can you imagine what is happening? Israel is telling the Palestinian people, either you demolish your house or I will demolish it myself. But demolish it yourself with your own hands, it's better, because if I demolish it, you will have to pay the cost of the demolishing. Have you ever heard about this? Can you imagine what is happening? This is what is taking place. I have to demolish my house, or they demolish my house and they make me pay for it. Furthermore, the Israeli government has authorized the establishment of Jewish racist terrorist organizations exercising terrorism against our people. They have provided them with protection while they are aggressing the Palestinians and calling to expel them from their homes. On top of these terrorist organizations, I mention the Hilltop Youth, Price Tag, Lehava, the Temple Guardians, and many others. These terrorist organizations are being led by members of the Israeli Knesset, by members of the Israeli legitimacy. And in this context, we call upon the international community to list these terrorist organizations on the international terrorism lists. This is the only place they deserve. Israel did not leave us any land on which we can establish our independent state in the frame of its frantic settlement expansion. Where will our people live in freedom and dignity? Where can we build our independent state that will live in peace with its neighbors? We want to live in peace with them, with Israel. Where will we establish our independent state to live in peace with them? The settlements, unfortunately, constitute 751,000, or 25% of the total population, 25% in the West Bank, the Palestinian land which remains for us. Israel is killing our people with impunity, as it did with the Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. You have all heard of Shireen Abu Akleh. She was killed with the bullets of a sniper. It means that the sniper deliberately killed her, and Israel recognized that the sniper recognized that he did kill her. And besides her Palestinian nationality, she also has the American nationality. And I dare the United States to prosecute those who have killed this American national. Why? Because they are Israelis. Israel is also targeting our sacred holy sites, Christian and Islamic, especially in Jerusalem, our eternal capital and the crown jewel. And I would like to reiterate here our attachment to the Hashemite custodianship on these holy sites. Those are the Muslim and Christian holy sites that are being targeted on a daily basis by Israel without any justification. Every day, here they are attacking the funerals of Shireen Abu Akleh inside the church, inside that holy place. They have attacked the procession, and this is what Israel is doing in the holy sites. Israel is also imposing falsified curricula in our schools in occupied Jerusalem. They are inventing curricula. With the same authors, they take the book and they change what is put in that book, and then they impose the curricula on our children to control what they are learning. This is a violation of international law. Israel is also disrupting the presidential and legislative Palestinian elections by forbidding the Palestinian citizens in Jerusalem to take part in these elections. And this has taken place in 1996, in 2005, and in 2006. So there are 3 precedents, 3 times where they did so. And they ask us, why don't you organize elections? We are ready. We have issued the decrees to organize these elections, and we have decided to organize the elections, but Israel did not allow us to do so. Therefore, we did not cancel the elections, we only postponed them. When Israel allows, or when some tell her that she can allow, or when some order Israel that they can allow for these elections to take place, then we will organize them. Israel is enacting racist laws, consecrating the apartheid regime. Yes, apartheid. And if they do not like the appellation, this is the truth. They are an apartheid regime. Not only between Palestinians and Jews. They are doing so against our people before the eyes of the international community with total impunity. Why isn't Israel being held accountable for violating international law? Who is protecting Israel from being held accountable? I have no idea. Do you know? Do you know who is protecting Israel from being held accountable? The United Nations. And on top of the United Nations, the most powerful in the United Nations. Why these double standards? Why don't they treat us equally with the others? Why these double standards when it comes to Israel? Israel did not hesitate to repeatedly violate our land, and recently they have closed the headquarters of 6 Palestinian human rights organizations. They want the law. They try to implement the law, but if we make a mistake, they hold us accountable and they say you have made a mistake. Suddenly, Israel considers that these organizations are terrorist organizations, and they raid their headquarters and they loot their assets, they confiscate their documents and burn them. They do whatever they please. And the whole world is saying that this is wrong, except for Israel. It is saying that it is not wrong. This is what Israel has done in the offices of these human rights organizations. What would it have done if they weren't human rights organizations? Ladies and gentlemen, Israel, ever since it was created, has committed heinous crimes against our people. When they destroyed 529 Palestinian villages, expelling their dwellers during and after the war of 1948. They have displaced a figure that some try to manipulate sometimes. They have displaced 950,000 Palestinian refugees, so half of the Palestinian people back then, 950,000, not as Israel says 250,000. No, 950,000. Those are the UNRWA statistics. So the UN statistics. And of course, now they account for millions. Israel has committed ever since and until now, more than 50 massacres. More than 50 massacres. Since 1948 and until today. And some of those massacres have been recently committed, and Israel recognized that it had deliberately committed these massacres and that they have targeted the farmers coming back from their agricultural land, and they killed them in cold blood. 50 or 51 massacres. The most recent of which was against Gaza, which was targeted with missiles. I will not tell you how many elderly it killed, but the New York Times, it's a US newspaper, so the New York Times said 67 children were killed in Gaza. Of course, they were carrying missiles, and they were in tanks, and they were launching missiles. 67 children, those are their photos. They were killed by Israel. Who is going to assume this responsibility, and why did Israel kill them? And I would like to give you lists of these villages that were destroyed, of these massacres that were perpetrated, and I would like to ask Israel from this rostrum to recognize its responsibility for destroying these villages, committing these massacres, and displacing the Palestinian citizens, and to apologize to the Palestinian people. After all this killing, they have to apologize. We call them to bear the legal, political, moral, and material responsibility. They should be held accountable. And the international community should hold them accountable. We ask the international community right now to hold them accountable for what they have done, for the massacres they have committed. And we will go to the International Criminal Court, yes. And to all the courts of the world. But first and foremost to the International Criminal Court, to ask Israel to shoulder its legal, political, moral, and financial responsibilities. I ask here, does the Israeli people want to remain a colonizing people forever? They have been so for 75 years. Until when? I would like to ask you, should we wait for a century or maybe for 2 centuries? We are the only people on this planet still living under occupation. Why? Why? You, as a General Assembly, you members of the Security Council, you advocates of human rights, why should we remain under occupation? What are we still waiting for? What are the Israelis going to teach us? Why should they be occupying us, or teach us, or kill us, or confiscate our land, loot our resources? Even the rain which falls on us is being taken by them, and then they sell it back to us. They take our rain, and then they sell it back to us. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not accept to remain the only party respecting the agreements we have signed with Israel in 1993. Those agreements are not valid anymore. because of the persisting violations of Israel. And although we have asked Israel to end its occupation and its hostile measures and policies and all the unilateral actions that were stated explicitly in the Oslo Accords, and which President Biden mentioned to me in person. He said that unilateral actions should be ended, and Israel was the first to violate this, and it is taking all unilateral actions while we haven't taken any unilateral action. And we do not want to do that, and we do not want to violate laws. But until when? Until when we will respect and be the only ones respecting these agreements? Therefore, it is our right, rather our obligation, to look for other means to recover our rights and to achieve a peace built on justice, including the implementation of the resolutions that were adopted by our leaderships, especially our parliament. 7 years ago, the parliament adopted decisions, and we used to tell them, wait for a while, maybe things will change, be patient, maybe the US or Israel will change their stance, but no one listened to us. We are making these decisions in order to preserve our national existence on our land and in order to uphold our historical rights in our nation under the umbrella of the PLO, the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, which brings together all the people, all the Palestinian people, wherever they are in the world, inside Palestine, in the refugee camps, and in the diaspora. All those who have the Palestinian nationality or used to have the Palestinian nationality fall under the umbrella of the PLO. Dear participants, the United Nations, in its different organs, has adopted hundreds of resolutions on Palestine. None was implemented. Is it possible? Not a single resolution was implemented. 754 resolutions from the General Assembly, 97 resolutions from the Security Council, 96 resolutions from the Human Rights Council, and not one was implemented. How come? Why? Why, when a resolution is taken here or there, everyone calls for its implementation and calls for implementing the international legitimacy, while all these resolutions were adopted for Palestine and no one cares? Not a single resolution. Implement one single resolution and tell us we have implemented it. We want the implementation of a single resolution. And right now, Resolution 181, which you have adopted. Resolution 181 is the resolution that we want to be implemented. We want you to implement Resolution 181. And with it, another resolution. Why? Resolution 194, because those two resolutions are preconditions to accept Israel as member of the United Nations. And Moshe Shared, back then, the foreign minister of Israel, said that he pledges to implement these two resolutions, and therefore Israel was accepted as member of the UN. But until now, neither resolutions was implemented. I want the resolution 181 to be implemented. One single resolution. It is our right to ask for its implementation. So go ahead, implement it and tell us that you have done so. We have submitted a request to the Secretary General to implement this resolution. Is it possible? Or are you going to ignore us once again, as you have been doing for so long? The State of Palestine will also start the accession process to join other international organizations. We were allowed to join as an observer state to the UN. We are an observer state in the United Nations. 15 million Palestinians, all of them educated, all of them highly educated, but we are only observer members. Fine. But this membership allowed us to accede to other international organizations. And starting tomorrow, we will pursue this. And it is our right to do so. And we will be joining the WHO, the WIPO, and the ICAO. We are going to accede to these organizations, and this is our right, and no one can blame us. The Security Council has adopted clear resolutions, the implementation of which will achieve a just and comprehensive peace, the most recent of which was Resolution 2334. In 2016, the Security Council and the United States itself submitted this resolution. The resolution was adopted, and 2 days later, Mr. Trump canceled everything, including this resolution, and came up with the ultimate deal and all his other projects that we have totally rejected. That was a resolution submitted by the United States and adopted with the sponsorship of the United States, but it has disappeared. Why? Because Mr. Trump rejected it. And I would like to remind you that we do not need double standards anymore. If we are prohibited from getting a full membership for the state of Palestine in the United Nations and protecting the Palestinian people, we have been asking you to protect us from aggression, but no one has done anything. And if no practical measures are taken to end occupation and achieve peace, we will have to resort once again to the General Assembly and ask the resolution to take the necessary legal and political steps to achieve that goal. And then we hope, we have the right to hope. We hope to be able to hope. We are living on this hope. We are confident. We are confident that the General Assembly which will fully shoulder its responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, I am confident that you will understand why we are going to take all these measures now. Throughout the past years, we have tried everything in order to convince Israel to go back to the negotiation table based on the resolutions of the international legitimacy and the signed agreements, but Israel refused and is still refusing to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, with all due respect to what the international community has done or has tried to do, at least, because they haven't done everything. So despite what the international community has done or tried to do in terms of supporting politically and materially our people and our just cause, it was unfortunately unable to end occupation and to end the heinous and continuous Israeli aggression on our people and to protect our people. We want to be protected. Please protect us. Protect us. We will not resort to weapons. We will not resort to violence, I promise you. We will not resort to terrorism. We will fight terrorism with you, hand in hand, but protect us from violence like you are doing for the other peoples of the world. Today, the occupying state is acting as a state above the law. Why? Do you know why Israel is acting as if it were a state above the law? Why? Can anyone answer me? No one will answer me. Surprisingly, states like the United States pretend to uphold international law and human rights, while at the same time providing, I will speak frankly here, while at the same time providing support to Israel, protecting Israel from accountability, and assisting Israel to pursue its hostile policies in contempt to the whole international community. Israel wouldn't have been able to do what it did without the cover or the support of these states. Honestly put, if you don't want to say it, because it is not politically correct, I will say it. Some of these states were partners at the very beginning in adopting the decisions that led to the Nakba of the Palestinian people, the famous Balfour Declaration. Do you remember the Balfour Declaration? Of course, you do not remember it because we are the only ones suffering its consequences. And after the Balfour Declaration, the mandate and the sustained injustice against the Palestinian people when they refused to compel Israel to end its occupation and aggression and to respect the decisions of the international legitimacy. Therefore, these states bear, along with Israel, the responsibility for the plight of the Palestinian people. Therefore, we ask the United Kingdom, the United States, and Israel, the three of them. And this is official. This is an official request. We ask them to recognize their responsibility for this major crime that was committed against our people and to apologize. We ask for remedy and redress and for compensation to the Palestinian people, compensations that would be decided by the international law. Whatever you decide, we will accept it. We want recognition of the injustice. And do you think this will take place? No. Sad enough, ladies and gentlemen, the United States and several European states, which are calling for the two-state solution and recognize the state of Israel, they say that we want the two-state solution, we support the two-state solution, we recognize the state of Israel, fine, but where is the other state? Well, no, the other state exists. It is there. Recognize it for things to proceed, for peace to be upheld. these states did not recognize the state of Palestine so far, and they threaten to use the veto right if we try to ask for a full membership in the international organization. If we ask, or when we ask for the full membership, they threaten us to use the veto right. To whom can we complain? To God. Palestine, the observer state in this organization for 10 years now, has proved that it qualifies for full membership. You have all recognized this. Palestine have been working seriously and in full responsibility with the other states of the world in the different committees and specialized organs, and it has chaired successfully the G77 and China. We are an observer state, and despite that, we have chaired the group and we have succeeded in our works. So why aren't we allowed to be full members? What are we lacking? Why can't these states recognize the state of Palestine and accept its full-fledged membership in the United Nations? Therefore, we wish, and therefore we beg, and therefore we plead, and we reiterate our request to get this full membership now. And we ask, why are you implementing double standards against us? We are the exception. We are the only ones in the world on whom double standards are being applied. On the other hand, I would like to call upon the Secretary General of the United Nations to work relentlessly to elaborate an international plan to end the occupation of the land of the State of Palestine, to achieve peace, security, and stability in the region, in line with the resolutions of the international legitimacy and in line with the Arab Peace Initiative. The Arab Peace Initiative has been violated by some, but it is there, it exists. The resolution is Resolution 1515, so why don't we implement it? Ladies and gentlemen, when we hear something positive, we acknowledge it. And yesterday, I listened to the US President Joe Biden and to the Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid and to other world leaders. I heard them supporting the two-state solution, and we are thankful for that. This is, of course, a positive development. But the real test to the seriousness and credibility of this stance, because we have had enough resolutions and enough words. So the true test to the credibility and seriousness of this stance is for the Israeli government to go back to the negotiation table immediately, tomorrow, to implement the two-state solution in line with the resolutions of the relevant international resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative, and to end all the unilateral measures that undermine the two-state solution. You cannot negotiate with me while you are expanding the settlements and killing and demolishing. No, these unilateral actions should end, at least temporarily. You should end temporarily these acts and let us negotiate. If the negotiations fail, then you can go back to whatever you want to do. But if you want to negotiate, you have to stop these unilateral measures. The state of Palestine is looking forward to peace. Let us make this peace to live in security, stability, and prosperity for the benefit of our generations and all the people of the region. We want peace. We are fighting terrorism wherever it is. And you know perfectly well that between us and 85 states in the world, we have signed agreements to fight terrorism. No one can deny that. What more do you want? We are ready for this initiative. To conclude, I would like to tell my people and the whole world that I am proud to have spent decades of my life struggling with my brethren, the leaders of the Palestinian people. Some have passed and some are still alive, to have fought in order to uphold the rights of our courageous Palestinian people, which has given the best example of sacrifice. And despite all the conspiracies and all the pressure that were placed on us and on our people, we have upheld our independent national decision. No one can interfere in our independent national decision. No one can interfere. The decisions we take are ours, and no one can interfere. We are also attached to our national constants that are well known, and we reiterate our rejection to any orders or directives from whoever. No state can give us any directives or orders, whether big or small. We make our own decisions. I would like to pay tribute to the martyrs of the Palestinian people who have lit the way to freedom and independence with their blood. They will remain symbols to be remembered by the coming Palestinian generations, generation after generation, and we will honor the responsibility they left us. As for our brave prisoners, they are the living conscience of our people. They are sacrificing their freedom for the freedom of their people. I would like to pay tribute to the brave prisoners who are living martyrs. They have taken 4 or 5 life sentences. They are in prisons, but they are heroes and they are our leaders. Their freedom will be our fight, and we will not fail them until they are freed. We will not fail their sons and their daughters. We will not fail their families and their relatives. I would like to tell them and to tell our children prisoners. Some of them are 7, 8, or 10 years old, and they are prisoners. What do we do about that? Look at this picture. One child and 30 soldiers arresting him. Is it acceptable? Tens of thousands of children are in prison. Who can accept that? Which international law, which conscience can accept for a 7-year-old child to be imprisoned and prosecuted? Legally speaking, he is not responsible for his acts. And I would like to tell the hero prisoner Nasser Abu Hamid. Nasser Abu Hamid was indicted and convicted. Look at him, how he was and how he is now. He is waiting for his death any time now. His mother is asking to see him for a single minute. Why aren't you allowing his mother to see him for a single minute? She is a mother of a martyr. Nasser Abu Hamid is a hero, is a martyr, and she has among her sons prisoners and martyrs, and she wants to see her son for a single minute before he passes away. No religion, no law can accept this. From this rostrum, I would like to pay tribute to the mother of Nasser, the mother of martyrs and of prisoners. Unfortunately, the occupying power did not allow her to see her son, the hero, the prisoner, for a single minute while he is struggling against death because of medical negligence. He is a cancer patient. He is a prisoner. He committed a crime, but from the human point of view, he should be treated, but he's not allowed to be treated. He's not allowed to see his mother, and no one is allowed to see him even after he passes away. They take the prisoner who passed away, and they do not allow his family to take him back. This has been going on since 1967. There are martyrs who are placed in boxes with numbers away from their families. Who can accept that? To conclude, I would like to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you as representatives of the international community and international legitimacy, that occupation will end sooner or later. So let us now, you who bear the responsibility for the implementation of your resolution, let us achieve that in order to build just a comprehensive peace instead of achieving peace with more sacrifice. Dear brothers, we have waited too long. We are tired. Do you have a solution? I need a solution. Thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea,
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the State of Palestine for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
ahora continuaremos.
We shall now continue the general debate. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
En nombre de la Asamblea.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honour to welcome His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In Senegal, in December last, I met doctors and researchers, very passionate and determined to save lives. And thanks to international cooperation, they created within the Pasteur Institute a center for vaccine production equipped with the most promising technologies. And several months later, in Borodyanka, in Ukraine, I met with children and I saw in their eyes the horror of a war. And I've heard stories about violence against women, about rape, about torture, mass graves, the merchants of death. So I saw hope in Dakar and horror in Borodyanka. Putting an end to horror and choosing hope is the promise of the United Nations, and that is also what founded the European Union. And that's what we want. We want hope for the entire world. And for this, the European Union extended their hand to all of those who want to work together for the common good and to honor the promise of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am going to be talking to you about hope. But first, it is unfortunate, I'm going to have to talk to you about war. Any war is a denial of humanity, and all suffering who are worthy of the same involvement, be it in Yemen, in Ethiopia, in the Sahel, in Myanmar, or in Ukraine. The Kremlin launched a war against the Ukrainian people, and hundreds of millions of women and children are thus targeted throughout the world. They are threatened with famine, they are left without heat, and they are crushed by the energy prices. The Kremlin is leading a hybrid war. This war combines armed violence with poisonous lies. The poisonous lies. The security of Russia is supposedly for years has been threatened, and I say this in inverted commas, by the West. That's false. The Kremlin is trying, and in vain, I hope, to mobilize the entire world against an imaginary enemy. Absolutely no one has threatened, attacked, or invaded Russia. And no one, absolutely no one in Europe wanted a conflict with Russia. What interest would we have in imperiling the security and prosperity of everyone? The second lie is that this war is supposed to prevent an alleged genocide of the Russian-speaking peoples in Ukraine and to denazify the country. It's false and it's repugnant. A genocide is a specific, intentional, total, or partial elimination of a national, ethnic, or religious group, and therefore no one, except for the Kremlin, would have remarked a large-scale massacre committed nowadays by the Ukrainians against other Ukrainians. And what is a so-called liberation, but it results in the killings of the Russian-speaking people and the destruction of their infrastructure of their cities? And lastly, the third lie is that the aggression against Ukraine is just a simple special operation and not a war. Once again, this is false and outrageous. It's a war. And the mobilization announced a few days ago of hundreds of thousands of reservists only confirms that. Banning the very name of war in Russia and imposing up to 15 years prison sentence for that does not change the nature of the event. It only shows its shameful character. It is a war. It's an unprovoked aggression, illegal and justified, which is trying to change internationally recognized orders by the use of force. It is not acceptable, and it's because we need to stop the Kremlin war machine that the massive economic sanctions became unavoidable. And let me now move on to the fourth lie, according to which the sanctions triggered shortages of foodstuffs and fertilizers. That is false. It was Russia, even before the war, which decided unilaterally to drastically reduce level of its grain and fertilizer exports, thus promoting the volatility of world markets. And it is Russia which decided to impose a military blockade on the Black Sea ports, thus making it impossible to conduct maritime trade. And it was the European Union which opened the corridors of solidarity by road, through which tens of millions of tons of foodstuffs have already left Ukraine. And it's an agreement broken by the Secretary General Guterres, which opened a naval corridor in the Black Sea, contributing to a price drop in the world markets and reopening the resupplies to Africa, Middle East, and Asia. And today, the pinnacle of cynicism, it is the Kremlin which threatens once again to not extend this agreement signed with the United Nations. And once again, it is the most vulnerable countries who will be the main victims of that. In fact, there's a very simple solution to end this food crisis which is threatening us. Russia needs to stop the war, withdraw from Ukrainian territory, and lift its blockade of ports. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, this web of lies clashes with a moment of truth and sincerity. A year ago, in a written statement which was published, Vladimir Putin affirmed, on the basis of historical fantasies, that Ukraine, according to him, is not a nation and is not a legitimate state. So this is what is at the heart of this thinking, but no one is fooled by that, and the sham referenda will change nothing here. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, in 1963, At the time of the founding of the Organization of African Unity in Addis Ababa, Modibo Keita, the first president of independent Mali, said the following, and I quote, "Imperialism is a manifestation of domination by a man over another, of a society over another, of a people over another, and of the will to at any cost impose their way of thinking, their way of life, and their way of political and economic development." End of quote. Imperialism and revanchism. These are the foundations of this war of colonization, which is targeting Ukraine and which is deliberately flouting international law and the United Nations Charter. And it goes as far as threatening the use of nuclear weapons and of using at this time the largest European nuclear power plant as a military base. This must stop. This is not acceptable, and we support the efforts made by the IAEA Director Rafael Grossi to restore security at the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Ladies and gentlemen, I am telling you in the most solemn way from this rostrum that the European Union is asking no one to choose between East and West, between North and South. But there is a choice that needs to be made. And the choice of the European Union is to choose for the respect of borders and not aggression, for cooperation and not threats. It's to choose a rules-based order and not the law of the strongest. At this very rostrum, in 1948, one of the founding fathers of the European Union, the Belgian Prime Minister at the time, Paul-Henri Spaak, spoke directly to the Soviet Union. And he said, and I quote, "We are afraid because in this assembly, you have made yourself the champion of the doctrine of absolute national sovereignty, and we wonder how an international organization can reach its goals if this outdated and reactionary doctrine is triumphant." Ladies and gentlemen, today, Russia makes you afraid. The Kremlin brought war to Europe and is acting like a blackmailer. We cannot allow the destructive actions of one of us to imperil our common fierce determination to act for the common good. The European Union is extending its hand, which is sincere and loyal. We have many challenges to tackle together. The pandemic, very painful effects, especially for the vulnerable. The Human Development Index is backsliding. The rights of women and minorities are flouted, and extreme natural phenomena are multiplying in number. Recently, we saw this in Pakistan and Nigeria. And fractures are opening up between developed and developing countries, between democracies and authoritarian regimes. Fractures are opening up also within our own countries. Multilateral cooperation is collective intelligence in action. It is also the DNA of the European Union, and the European Union is acting as a force for peace, development, and the promotion of human rights. The European leadership aims to build using solutions with you. It's not our role to lecture. There is no teacher, no one is a student. And it is within this spirit of cooperation that we're working at the UN, G7, G20, and everywhere. And it is for this reason, and it is this spirit that we're extending our hand with strategic partnerships. With our African brothers, we have completely changed the program. Our partnership is truly between equals and forward-looking, and I would like to reiterate here my support and advocacy for the inclusion of the African Union in G20. With Japan and South Korea, for example, we share so much, and day after day we're strengthening our relations. With India and the ASEAN, we're widening our areas of cooperation. Our links with the Latin American continent are natural. And we expect and are looking forward to a lot for the upcoming summit to give new impetus to our relationship. With the countries of the Gulf, we identify our common priorities, and we have frank and regular dialogues on our differences. Ladies and gentlemen, we want the emerging powers, including China, to participate sincerely in the collective efforts for peace and development. We advocate maritime security. We advocate stability in the Strait of Taiwan. We recognize the principle of one China, but we will not close our eyes to the violations of human rights, especially in Xinjiang and in Hong Kong. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here at the United Nations, the home for peoples of the world. And we do know, every one of us, that a robust multilateral system implies mutual trust. But the current system is not sufficiently inclusive or representative. The use of the right to veto should be an exception, but it has become, we have seen it, the rule. A reform is needed and urgent. And let me share with you this conviction. When a permanent member of the Security Council launches an unprovoked and justifiable war, the war which is condemned by the National Assembly, that member's suspension from this Security Council, in my view, should be automatic. Ladies and gentlemen, we support the proposals by the Secretary General on the Common Agenda. And the Summit of the Future in 2024 should be a historic opportunity to bring in these radical improvements. The European Union is very actively involved together with the G5 Sahel countries. We are ready to develop links with the Gulf of Guinea countries. We also work with Mozambique. We support the efforts made by Rwanda and SADC. And with our High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security, Joseph Borrell, we spare no effort to try and bring back the JCPOA on the Iran nuclear issue. We stand shoulder to shoulder with the Afghan people, especially the Afghan women, and we will not stop to combat everywhere the obscurantism which flouts on a daily basis the rights of women and girls in all areas. And at the time where I'm standing here in front of you, my thoughts go to the women and girls in Iran who are courageously rising to defend their dignity at the price of their lives. In Yemen, we are witnessing a serious humanitarian crisis, and the people of Yemen have the right to peace. We support the efforts made by the Special Envoy Grunberg to convert the current truce into a lasting ceasefire. The peace agreements between Arab states with Israel is progress in the region, but the Palestinian people has been waiting for far too long and in vain for any progress towards its own future. The Palestinian people cannot become the forgotten entity in the global landscape. This two-state solution of Israel and Palestine peacefully living together with a security assured for everyone remains a priority. And I have an opportunity to personally become engaged in a difficult negotiation with the president of Azerbaijan and the prime minister of Armenia. Violence must stop, and the objective must be to resolve the conflict to bring in lasting peace and prosperity in Southern Caucasus. Leadership is to show the way, of course, but also leadership means delivering results. When it comes to energy security, we have been far too dependent for far too long, imperiling our security, our prosperity, our sovereignty. Energy and climate change are the two sides of the same coin. Overcoming the energy crisis means pushing back the climate danger. Protecting our biodiversity and our oceans is to safeguard our future. Climate neutrality is our lodestar in Europe. At the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we will strongly advocate to implement the promises of Paris and to go beyond. We want a fair and equitable transition. No country on their own can safeguard the planet. the European Union, honors its commitment towards developing countries, and we expect that other developed countries will follow suit. Ladies and gentlemen, about 1/5 of humankind is now in danger of plunging into poverty and famine. 1/5. And the Russian war against Ukraine compounds this crisis. Initiatives are underway, and that's a very good thing, by the G7, European Union, and others. The European Union is mobilizing about 8 billion euros for food security by 2024. But we all know that more needs to be done. There needs to be more coordination, more money, and also more sovereignty. New agricultural models, more resilient, more equitable, are needed. More food sovereignty in Africa and Latin America is indispensable. And there also, we are ready to extend the hand to support the projects of fertilizer production on these continents, similarly to what was done for the COVID vaccine. COVID-19 opened our eyes to our strengths and our weaknesses. Vaccines were made in record time, and under the leadership of the WTO Director Okonyo-Iweala, a balance was found between intellectual property, scientific innovation, and universal access to technology. But we do know that we need to draw lessons from the pandemic, which hit us so much. And that is the reason why Dr. Tedros and myself, some time ago, launched an idea of a treaty on pandemics to strengthen global health security. Its negotiation is on the way, and we need to finalize it. Ladies and gentlemen, I am concluding. We understand very well we are at a watershed moment of our history, a watershed moment of the history of humankind. Watershed moment expression was used and reused but sometimes we feel that we're living through something that is exceptional, extraordinary. And I'm thinking of Winston Churchill, who in 1946, when you were talking about the failure about the League of Nations to prevent the First World War, he said, the League of Nations did not fail because of its principles or conceptions. It failed because these principles were deserted by those states who had brought it into being, because the governments of these states were afraid of facing facts, and to act while there was still time. Act while there was still time. As the European Union, the United Nations, is a project of hope, founded in the wake of the horrors of 2 world wars. A few days ago, my 6-year-old daughter all of a sudden told me and her mother that she was afraid of war. And it made my hair stand on end, because no parent in the world can stand it when the child says they're afraid of war, or that they're facing war, or that they are hungry, or that their children cannot be provided with care. No parent in the world can stand a situation where their child does not have a hope for a dignified and happy life. Preventing or stopping horrors in Borodyanka, in Yemen, or elsewhere, giving hope, as was the case with the doctors I saw in Dakar and elsewhere. That is the very nexus of our responsibility as leaders representing people in the world. And above and beyond our many differences, but above and beyond them, we all have red blood coursing through our veins. We all have hearts beating in our chests, and we have the same dreams of education and freedom for our boys and girls. I believe in collective wisdom. I trust that science and knowledge will give the world hope again. We need an awakening, and this awakening is now, and it needs to be together. And you can count on the European Union for that. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the European Council of the European Union for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Josiah Voreke Bainimarama, Prime Minister and Minister for Itauke Affairs, the Sugar Industry, Foreign Affairs and Forestry of the Republic of Fiji. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Tengo el placer de dar la bienvenida al excelentísimo señor Josiah.
I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Josiah Voreke Bainimarama, Prime Minister and Minister for Itauke Affairs, Sugar Industry, Foreign Affairs and Forestry of the Republic of Fiji. I invite him to address the Assembly.
The President of the UN General Assembly, Jaba Korosi, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Bulavinaka, and good morning. First, I congratulate you, Your Excellency Jaba Korosi, on your election as the President of the General Assembly. I also commend your predecessor, Foreign Minister Abdullah Shahid of the Maldives. Excellencies, in a year of challenge, I'm here to condemn not one, but three great global conflicts. The first is Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine, a scourge that reflects a brutal mentality of conquest and empire. No matter their might, no matter their size, Fiji is unafraid to condemn any warring nation. We owe nothing less to the Fijian peacekeepers who have sacrificed and paid the ultimate price for peace's sake around the world. We in the Pacific, who have lived the horror of nuclear fallout, wholly denounce Mr. Putin's threatened use of nuclear weapons. And I appeal to him, give diplomacy a chance to bring this war to a speedy close. We too condemn another war, the climate war, that humanity is waging on itself, on our ecosystems and ocean. This war isn't fought with bullets and bombs, but apathy, denial, and a lack of courage to do what we all know what must be done. This is a war we are losing in every community, in city, and country of every size. But small states, those least responsible, stand to lose the most of all. Yet we are not heard, not even it seems, by the leadership of some multilateral development banks. And so lastly, I condemn the Cold War of indifference against the citizens of small islands and states who bear the brunt of this superstorm of global shocks, from rising commodity prices to the climate crisis and the pandemic. Surely, as leaders, we have the capacity to defend peace on all these fronts. I ask, where is the world's courage to do so? I see that courage in the Fijian people I serve as we build up our country undaunted by these challenges. Today, I will share this story, not for the sake of pride, but because leaders should know the lives, the progress, and the aspirations they threaten with their inaction. I arrived this week from the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, a leader who holds a special place in Fijian history and in the hearts of the Fijian people, including my own. My fondest memory of Her Majesty was in London 4 years ago at a welcome reception she hosted at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. She walked over to me from a greeting post to say that she had asked the then Prince Charles to look after their other guests so that she could personally welcome me and Fiji back into the Commonwealth. It was a simple gesture, but a special affirmation of all that we had worked to achieve for Fiji's new and true democracy. For we had done away with an undemocratic system that relegated hundreds of thousands of Fijians to the margins of society by design. We had adopted a new constitution that echoed the spirit of the UN Charter's promise to uphold equal rights for all peoples, regardless of background, regardless of religion, ethnicity, regardless of gender, age, or physical ability or province. It guaranteed common and equal Fijian identity and citizenship for all citizens. The strong and accountable institutions it established and the protection it upholds produced an electoral system in which every Fijian vote holds equal value. And the Fijian people have used that vote to elect my government twice in the last 8 years. In our service, we have worked to advance the civil, political, and socio-economic constitutional rights of every Fijian, from the protection of indigenous land ownership to the right to clean water and adequate sanitation, the right to a clean and healthy environment, and the right to education, among many more. Since 2014, we have built or replaced hundreds of kilometers of water pipelines and improved access to clean water to over 80% of all Fijians. Thousands of Fijian households have gained access to the electric power for the first time, propelling electricity access in the country upwards of 96%. We have replaced or outright built dozens of bridges and crossings and lit up the country with thousands of new streetlights. We have built, upgraded, or rehabilitated close to 1,000 kilometers of roads. Poverty is falling, incomes are rising. The cost of data has fallen by as much as 98%. 95% of the Fijian population have mobile phone connectivity. And a national digital television platform, Walesi, reaches all 110 populated islands in Fiji. We achieved the longest stretch of economic growth in Fijian history. Among these wins for sustainable development, the Fijian education revolution is my greatest pride as Prime Minister. For the first time in our history, primary and secondary education are free. Not free in name, but free in fact and accessible to all. Textbooks are free, whether they travel by road, river, or travel by or ocean. Disadvantaged students, transportation to schools is subsidized. We have extended opportunities for tertiary education beyond what was ever thought imaginable. And today, Fijian women outnumber men in our universities. In times of crisis, our constitutional commitments to every Fijian have served us best and mattered most. The COVID-19 pandemic contracted our economy by over 20%. It stole half of our government revenues, flung over 100,000 Fijians out of full-time employment, and pressed us to the precipice of a socio-economic crisis. Through decisive policy choices, we maintained the strongest possible focus on protecting people and communities. Through our tourism revenue was zero, we paid out income support to the unemployed. We did not slash a cent of our pensions and payments to elderly and disabled Fijians. In total, we paid out $500 million in social assistance, the equivalent of 10% of the value of our GDP. With our partners' support, we achieved the near universal vaccination of our adult population. We reopened Fiji's borders from this past December, and we have since welcomed hundreds of thousands of visitors and earned hundreds of millions in revenue. More of our people are working again, and we are set toward the record-breaking double-digit economic growth for the Fijian economy this year. The pace of our recovery is possible because we prepared for it. We kept our national airline, Fiji Airways, ready to resume full operations throughout the COVID crisis. We supported our tourism industry to weather the storm. That allowed us to set the terms of our reopening. With our steady recovery, we are now paying out tens of millions of dollars to help the most vulnerable Fijian families meet the global rising cost of food, fuel, and other essentials. Excellencies, our 8-year-old democracy has delivered the equality our people cherish. It has delivered services and infrastructure they depend on. It certainly has all shown its resilience. Our eyes are now on the next 8 years, the sprint from now until 2030. That will be most defining ever for our people's and planet's future. If we do not halve carbon emissions by that critical year, the crisis of our warming planet will imperil every gain that we and every nation has made. If we fail to secure our 1.5, we will crush any hope of improving our citizens' quality of life. We've been given glimpses of that doomsday proposition worldwide in the floods, in the droughts, storms, wildfires, dying coral, and melting glaciers. Ladies and gentlemen, we in Fiji have felt that devastation in the 14 cyclones that have struck us since 2014. These storms have stolen lives. They have leveled homes. They have destroyed schools. They have traumatized our young. The Pacific's children are the least to blame, among the least to blame for the climate crisis. Yet, our children are the most affected. I challenge leaders from the high-emitting nations to name a greater global injustice than the price that young Pacific Islanders pay for climate change. Since 2014, Fiji has rebuilt or repaired over 200 cyclone-devastated schools. We have built cement and nature-based seawalls to keep out the rising seas. We have stabilized vast stretches of riverbank. Where seawalls cannot suffice, we have relocated 6 communities, with over 40 more in the queue to be moved. We are building back better to the standards demanded by a warmer world. We are borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars to do this. The archaic architecture of multilateral development banks and global financial services gives us little to no access to grant or concessional climate financing, particularly for adaptation. Therefore, we are left with little to no choice. We have legislated a net zero commitment by 2050 through a climate change act that will make us more energy secure, protect us from energy price shocks beyond our control, and provide us with cleaner air, better health, and better jobs. Yet, despite the clear benefits, the imperative before us, and all the talk we hear of saving the planet, the world's collective commitments remain trifling. They simply will not keep us at well below the 2 degrees Celsius target, let alone 1.5 degrees. And I again urge developed nations to deliver on the $100 billion climate finance commitment at COP27 in Egypt this year. This is now 3 years overdue. Ahead of Glasgow, I told leaders not to bother packing their bags if they did not come with serious carbon slashing commitments. I have a new ask before they arrive to Sharm el-Sheikh. Only come if you plan to arrive true to your climate finance commitments. Only come to Sharm el-Sheikh if you are ready to agree to a loss and damage mechanism in addition to a post-2025 financing framework. This must be in the order of 750 billion, with at least 10% of climate finance destined for small island states. Excellencies, this is our story, a Fijian story in every sense. It is the story of David against Goliath, a small state facing nations, corporations, and interests far bigger than we are. On behalf of every family who is watching us from home and praying for our success, we are unrelenting in this fight for your future. We are determined to provide you with opportunities to do well for yourselves and your families. We are determined to create new jobs in nature, in technology, in sustainable tourism, and our blue and green economy. Today, we ask the world to join us. This is not the time for war. This is not the time for words. This is a time for will and a time for courage. Fiji is ready to make the coming years count for our people and for the planet. Our question to you is this: are you with us? Don't tell us yes unless you plan to show it. Thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea,
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Itoke Affairs, Sugar Industry, Foreign Affairs and Forestry of the Republic of Fiji for the statement just made. And I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media and Minister for Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media, and Minister for Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. I invite him to address the Assembly. Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, dear colleagues, at the outset, I wish to align myself with the words of my colleague Charles Michel earlier on behalf of the European Union, because I'm part of a generation which has never known war, and we thought that war was relegated to the history books. However, my continent is now seeing war on its own soil, and our strength and our solidarity, our union, I believe, is our unity. I am proud, therefore, that the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg is contributing with its partners to the resolute action of the European Union to promote our shared values: human dignity, liberty, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and human rights. As Europeans, we commit decisively to defend these values, which are principles enshrined within the Charter of the United Nations, and to bolster multilateralism, working together with the United Nations at the heart of this. You have attributed the theme of your presidency to a watershed moment and the need to find transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. And we are indeed at a watershed for the world and for the United Nations. For almost 7 months now, a permanent member of the Security Council, the Russian Federation, has been waging a large-scale war of aggression against Ukraine, a sovereign neighborly country, with the involvement of Belarus. And this unprovoked, unjustified war has, for many people, and perhaps in many other countries in the European continent, this has revived the fears of war. And we are once again beginning to ask ourselves, is this possible? Might it happen? Recent threats and measures announced by Moscow merely exacerbate this situation, and we categorically condemn them. We do have a situation here with the Russian veto and with a Security Council which is blocked, and that is difficult. The Secretary General has condemned the manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations by Russia, and on the 16th of March, the International Court of Justice indicated precautionary measures requiring that the Russian Federation should immediately suspend military operations. And this assembly also met in an extraordinary session and adopted 3 resolutions in this context. A great majority of the members of this assembly condemned Russia's aggression against Ukraine and required and called that Russia should immediately cease fire. Upon the demand of President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, I participated as Prime Minister in these efforts. I held interviews with the Russian president and the representatives of the Russian Federation here in this room as well, and I do not regret my attempts. I am disappointed regarding the result. When I hear President Erdogan, for example, saying that last week that perhaps we would see peace, and then the same day President Putin announced the organization of referendums. And we know how long that takes, and if we try to organize referendums during wartime and we go to people's doors and ask them to put ballot papers into boxes, or however we organize it, it's impossible to organize referendums during circumstances such as those in existence today. I fear, indeed, Madam President, that this referendum is merely an excuse to justify further actions, to say that this is Russian territory and therefore Donbass must now be protected by Russia, thus justifying the even more brutal use of means than is currently happening. And I regret that. And my discussions with President Putin were an opportunity where I did appreciate the frankness and the discussions. But I do see that today starting a war seems to be easy, but the greatness of a political figure is marked by their abilities to end a war and to get out of it. And I do not know how President Putin can explain recent announcements and mobilizations and explain recent demonstrations. How can we explain to mothers who are going to lose their children or women who are going to lose their spouses to participate in a war that has no sense? As a politician, I have not been at the head of my country for a number of years now, and I always try to find responses to the questions I ask myself. And this is the first time, representatives of the Russian Federation, that I cannot find a response. I cannot understand this. So once again, I launch a call to your president for a ceasefire and diplomacy. I launched appeals, but in the end, I couldn't launch any more. I admit I didn't understand this, particularly having heard about members of the military who committed crimes. Saying that this is intolerable is not strong enough a word. This is intolerable. The war continues and has claimed 14,000 victims, civilian victims in Ukraine, including over 1,000 children. There are mass graves with people who have been slaughtered. I saw this in Bucha. There were summary executions. And every day is a day too many. And this also imperils Ukrainian nuclear plants, and many countries are afraid of that. This is an intolerable risk for Ukraine, but also for other European countries. And as I said, I went to Ukraine around 3 months ago, and I visited the cities of Borodyanka, Bucha, and Irpin. And I'm speaking about a personal experience here, but I met a woman who had lost everything. But she retained hope and a determination to believe in peace. She was there with her son, who had gone deaf as a result of the bombings. So I'm sorry, representatives of the Russian Federation, but we cannot. Nobody can condemn a country or a generation or kill innocent people. I cannot find the words to express this. And when I saw the atrocities committed by the Russian military forces, I could not but bow my head in the memory of children, innocent people whose lives were cut short by war. They had paid with their lives. I say this here, and I said this in Kiev as well, President. Ukraine can continue to count upon us to help them in defending their independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity within their internationally recognized borders. And the right to legitimate defense as enshrined in Article 51 of the Charter. It is our responsibility to help Ukraine. We cannot accept a larger neighbor. And I admit this. I do not belong to one of the largest countries in terms of size or army. But I cannot imagine living in a country where I would have to worry about the action or inaction by my neighbors. And I think that one of the greatest achievements of my continent is the European Union. And if since then we've been living in peace, it's because we have managed to build something together. My country is between France and Germany, and at the Second World War, they were enemy countries. Now we are partners and are building something together. I would not be here before you or be living in a democracy if countries which were not my neighbors but other countries had not helped me as a country. And as Luxembourg, we have also opened our doors to those fleeing war. These people do not want a better life, they just want to live. And we welcomed over 1,000 Ukrainian pupils into our schools. Whether this is in Kiev or at home in Luxembourg, the courage of these mothers, these families, these children, these men in Ukraine, they are starting to rebuild their country and breathe new life into their liberated towns after the barbarity visited upon them. And we must honor this courage by tirelessly supporting investigations carried out by national and international actors, and I'm thinking of the International Criminal Court, so that those responsible for crimes and war crimes and other crimes in Ukraine are identified, prosecuted, and punished. There can be no impunity for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, or the crime of aggression. And allow me to take this opportunity to applaud the courage in Russia. President Putin has called for a mobilization now, and there are young Russian people who are leaving their country. As Jean-Michel was saying earlier, we cannot talk about war without condemning it today. Is it too late? Perhaps it is too late. What has already happened is unforgivable. There must be a ceasefire. There must be a halt to the killing of innocents. And to the representatives of the Russian Federation, this is something that I hold very dear myself, and which is why I'm very sensitive to this topic. I have a grandmother who is Russian and a grandfather who was Polish. I have a Luxembourgish grandfather and a French grandmother, Orthodox and Jewish. One was an atheist, the other Catholic. And even in my country with Jewish blood and as a liberal and married to a man, I would be condemned to death in my own country. Let us accept differences and the wealth of diversity. Let us live in peace and no longer commit the same errors. And I launch an appeal to President Putin. Starting a war is not the difficult thing, as I said earlier, but stopping it is where true greatness lies. And this war began at a time when most of us were beginning to feel the relief of the end of the COVID pandemic. We thought that we would be able to move on, and now we are faced by issues of food security, particularly those in vulnerable situations in Africa and in the Middle East. And I repeat to our African colleagues, I know that there's a narrative saying that European sanctions are causing the problems and the food crisis, but this is false. It is the war, the aggression in Ukraine, which is responsible for the problems we are facing. And I should like to thank President Erdogan, who sat down at the table to try to find a way to get Ukrainian grain out of the Black Sea and the exports. And that is crucial for millions of people. We've seen an increase in energy prices, with repercussions which are extremely harsh for many Europeans as well. So it's easy to say that sanctions should be abandoned. I would like to see the war being abandoned. Not us, but you, our Russian colleagues. I would also like to welcome the initiative of the Secretary General to bring together a response group for the food and energy and financing crises to identify short, medium and long-term solutions. And I should like to thank Antonio Guterres and his teams for their tireless efforts, as I was saying, regarding the agreement with Turkey. We also wish to support the World Food Programme, the FAO and the IFAD to strengthen food and nutritional resilience. The Sahel region is suffering from food insecurity, amplified further by climate change and the effects of the war in Ukraine. I was also recently in Niger, and I should like to express gratitude for the leadership of President Bazoum there. Niger is a cooperation partner country, and we are committing to bolster stability in the region. I also want to say I remember when I was with Mr. Roche, and leaders have changed since then. Stability in Africa is, I believe, crucial, and it's another crisis alongside others. I'm proud, President, to be Prime Minister of a country which devotes 1% of its gross national income to official development assistance. And when we talk about public assistance, about official development assistance, there are countries or citizens indeed who might say, well, why do you help other people? There are problems at home. And I am proud that we devote 1% to help others when some of the problems we face at home are minimal compared to those elsewhere. We also wish to contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And in order to do this, our partnership with Africa is crucial. And we intend to bolster this at continental level with the European Union and African Union and bilaterally. And this goes beyond conventional cooperation centered around social areas such as health or education. It also extends to renewable energy, combating climate change, as we are doing with our partners in Cape Verde, and in the fields of ICT. I was recently in Kigali, where we are continuing to develop such partnerships. If we wish to be credible partners, we must commit ourselves. We can all hold meetings about commitments, but we fulfill those commitments. If you pledge something, then not do it. So with regard to climate financing, my country has decided to apply the principle of additionality. So our climate financing comes on top of our ODA. During the COP26 in Glasgow, I announced that the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg would increase its climate financing to 220 million euros over the 2021 to 25 period, and half of that will be used for adaptation to climate change in the most vulnerable countries. We also intend to invest increasing shares of this in innovative instruments to mobilize private financing instruments. We are European chef de file in the area of sustainable finance, and we are increasing the major role of private capital in order to move towards carbon neutrality. Along with the EIB, we are working on this in the field of sustainable finance. In the face of climate urgence, we are somewhat reticent. We wonder if perhaps we should or should not act. I've heard a number of speakers today. We're wondering about whether the temperatures will go up by 2 or 3 degrees and what the consequences may be. But there are countries who are asking themselves how long they will even exist. They may be removed from the map because of these increases in in temperature. In Luxembourg, we have launched a Citizens' Council for the Climate, where citizens will meet together and come up with proposals. And we realize that our citizens' proposals are often more courageous than ours as politicians. So we must listen to them. This is an interesting experience. We're going to meet in Sharm el-Sheikh, many of us, and we must mobilize to steer a steady course towards the objective of 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we signed up to in Paris. It is only by achieving this objective that and by pooled efforts, that we will reduce the impact of climate change. Allow me to think of our friends in Pakistan here and what is happening in Pakistan, which has an impact on human rights as well, and particularly the rights of children, which is therefore one of the priorities of Luxembourg in the Human Rights Council. We commit in the Council also to promote gender equality, to combat discrimination, to the rule of law, to bolster civic spaces and combat impunity. I also wish to think about Mahsa Amini in Iran and what happened there. The morality police were deciding about the fate of a woman. Is it justifiable, President? And I said this last year as well, that according to where I was born, my rights differ. Depending on where I was born, if I'm a member of a certain religion, I have no rights. If I am of a differing political opinion, I lose my rights. If I'm of a different sexual orientation, I lose my rights, or even may be condemned to death. And if I'm a woman, I have fewer rights than a man. That is a reality today in 2022. So it is extremely important that we continue to hold these independent international commissions of inquiry with regard to the violations of human rights. And their work, unfortunately, is increasing across the world. We also are committed to ensuring our actions are commensurate with the responsibility conferred upon us by our election to the Human Rights Council for 2022 to 24. It is the first time we've had the honor of sitting in this council, and I take this opportunity to express my own warm gratitude and that of the Luxembourg government and my country for having placed this trust in us. As you said, President, we are at a watershed moment. We must address the threats we all face, war or climate deregulation, and we must find shared responses and work together. To those who say the UN is powerless, I would respond that the United Nations is whatever we make it. It all depends upon our own ambition and what we manage to do. We need to mobilize to find solutions, forge alliances and commitments which allow us to bolster multilateral cooperation. This spring, for example, Luxembourg had the honor, along with Bangladesh, of facilitating negotiations which resulted in the adoption by consensus of the first declaration on progress made towards the implementation of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. We also participated in efforts which allowed for the adoption by consensus of the Liechtenstein initiative on the veto. This establishes a permanent mandate for this assembly to hold a debate if the veto is used in the Security Council. We have a system. The system is what it is, but let us make the best of it. We do need reforms of the Security Council. The United Nations can't be a dog whose bark is worse than its bite. We must have a UN that functions. This is a body. Remember why we're here. After the Second World War, we wanted to sit around a table to find solutions, to work together. The United Nations must not today be a place where a veto can block a desire to build something together. We therefore welcome the work underway to follow up on proposals made by the Secretary General in his report. And the Transforming Education Summit was held a few days ago, where the decision was taken to create a UN Youth Office. It's very important to involve young people because the errors we make today will be paid for by them tomorrow. We must have the courage to realize that politics may just be about the next mandate, but above all, it's about what we leave to future generations. So, President, I can assure you that Luxembourg will continue to serve the United Nations to champion our shared values, the values of humanity. This is why Luxembourg is also a candidate to the Security Council for 2031 to 32, and why we'll continue to work for peace and security in Ukraine, Mali, and the Middle East, which is why we continue to commit to uphold the rights of all human beings and humanitarian action for the people of Sahel, Syria. And we also step up when it comes to defending the Charter of the United Nations. Thank you very much for listening, Madam President, and I hope that next year, when we come here, the current atrocities in Ukraine will be part of history. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister of State, Minister for Communications and Media, and Minister for Religious Affairs of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mark Rutte, Prime Minister and Minister for General Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Mark Rutte, Prime Minister and Minister for General Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Growing up in Europe as a child of the Cold War, the Iron Curtain was a fact of life. I still vividly remember when the first breaches began to appear in the mid-1980s. The credit for that shift, which made a profound impression, was largely due to Mikhail Gorbachev, who passed away a few weeks ago. Although he represented a dogmatic, undemocratic and oppressive system, he had the courage, as a matter of principle, to choose freedom and humanity. I mention that memory here for a reason. As Russia's recent past and Mr. Gorbachev's legacy have shown, we always have to make a choice. The choice between might is right and, in the words of the great Dag Hammarskjöld, an international community living in peace under the laws of justice. That is my message today. Working together under the laws of justice is and will remain the only path to a safe and prosperous world. That is why Russia's aggression must be stopped. And right now, Russia stands on the wrong side of history. It is hard not to think of historical analogies where one powerful country with expansionist ambitions invades other countries under false pretense of victimhood and security. Let me be very clear. Russia is not the victim here. It is the aggressor. And the whole world knows it. No one was invading Russia. No one was threatening the Russian people. The people of Ukraine wanted only to be left in peace, to decide their own future. Again, there's only one aggressor here, and that is Russia. For too long, we assumed that it was pure rhetoric when Mr. Putin said that the end of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe. In hindsight, we all should have paid heed to his words, because they reflect a dangerous worldview. He won't stop at Ukraine if we don't stop him now. This war is bigger than Ukraine itself. It's about upholding the international rule of law. It is about a sovereign people's right to choose its own path. It's about freedom, theirs and ours. So this war is about our common future. And there's only one path for us to follow, one right choice to make. We must uphold the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. Principles we agreed to after the painful lessons of history learned from a past aggressor. This year, the NATO and European Union allies are more united than ever in our determination to stop Putin. And all UN member states should be united in condemning this unprovoked war. Because Russia's unbridled aggression is an assault on the UN Charter and the international rules-based order, an assault on the very foundations of our partnership, and so an assault on the security of us all. The Ukrainian people are fighting for their freedom, one stride at a time. I have great admiration for Ukraine's achievements on the battlefield. Ukraine is gaining ground. This shows that our military assistance is working, and it motivates us to do even more. In the past week, Putin made a speech that can only be described as a sign of panic, a sign of weakness. He is losing his own ill-thought war, and he knows it. That's why he clutches onto his delusionary narrative, full of lies and deceit. His words were meant to intimidate, but they leave us cold. Putin's latest threats to invoke its nuclear capabilities are intended to sow division in the growing unity that the world is showing, but he will not succeed. Together with our allies, the Netherlands will continue supporting Ukraine in any way we can, however long it takes, every inch of the way. So I call on each of you, all the UN member states, to stand firm for the principles we collectively laid down in the UN Charter, and to stand firm until peace, freedom, and territorial integrity are fully restored in Ukraine. That must be followed by rebuilding the country and achieving justice for those who have suffered from the war and the crimes and human rights violations arising from it. From sexual violence to deportation, torture, and random killing. The horrific crimes committed in Bucha, which I visited, and other places, must not go unpunished. I reiterate, the empty Russian threats leave us cold. But what does not leave us cold is the suffering of the people of Ukraine. And frankly, also the suffering of Russian people who are called up to fight against their will. Every week, we are seeing more evidence of atrocities, like in the recently liberated city of Izium. The world cannot and will not stand by and do nothing. There can be no justice without accountability. The Netherlands and the city of The Hague, the legal capital of the world, feel a special responsibility in this regard. We have already supported fact-finding missions by sending forensic experts to Ukraine in close cooperation with the International Criminal Court. And last July, we hosted the Ukraine Accountability Conference, where 45 countries agreed on key priorities in guaranteeing justice for Ukraine. We know from experience that achieving international justice can be a long and painstaking process. For more than 8 years now, we have been closing in on the Russians responsible for the downing of flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine. I'm grateful for the unwavering support we have received from Ukraine and many other countries in our fight for justice for the 298 victims and their families. And I promise you this: the Netherlands will continue working hard to ensure justice for Ukraine as well. By the same token, we stand firmly with those in Russia who oppose the war, who long for peace and justice, who do not want to send their children into a senseless war, and whose voices are not being heard. And we will also support those people all over the world who are suffering the effects of the war indirectly. Putin's war has created not only thousands of victims in Ukraine, but also hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of victims of hunger and poverty around the world. Here too, the UN family must hold Russia to account. Putin's cold-blooded power politics, exploiting the most basic human needs of so many people, provides an extra argument for ending the fossil fuel era even faster than we planned. It makes tackling that other great global issue, climate change, even more urgent. And here too, worldwide cooperation is an absolute must. Together, we all have made pledges aimed at keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And around the world, we all feel the urgency of this task. The Kingdom of the Netherlands, which is made up of 4 very different countries, is also feeling the effects of climate change. From heavier rainfall and worsening drought in the European part of the kingdom to more severe hurricanes and rising sea levels in the Caribbean part. Small island developing states are at the forefront of the world's climate adaptation strategies. And Curaçao, Aruba, and Sint Maarten, the island countries of our kingdom, are no exception. We are experiencing both the challenges confronting mainland Europe and those which small island states face every day. Rising ocean temperatures, coral bleaching, loss of biodiversity, and ocean pollution. As one kingdom, we know that water is the factor linking all the great challenges of our time. From food and energy.
Extremely unfortunate. Pacific countries have also established a Pacific Resilience Facility, a financing mechanism that aims to build resilience and reduce vulnerability of Pacific population to the negative impacts of climate change. A pledging session for the facility will be held during this session, and we call on all partners to support the facility. Solomon Islands also commends the Vanuatu-led initiative requesting support for the United Nations to ask the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on climate change that is also strongly supported by Pacific leaders. Mr. President, as the world continues to combat climate change, we ask all parties going into COP27 to set more ambitious nationally determined contributions that would put our world on a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. We would also like to see a roadmap for ease of access and timely disbursement of the year's $100 billion adaptation finance by 2025. The discussions on loss and damage demand a standalone agenda, and COP27 aimed at establishing a loss and damage financing facilities. Mr. President, Solomon Islands embraces the promotion and respect for human rights as a fundamental freedom for all. We subscribe to Resolution 60/251 that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interrelated, interdependent, and mutually reinforcing, and that all human rights must be treated in a fair and equal manner, on the same footing with the same emphasis. Now I am pleased to inform this Assembly that Solomon Islands has successfully deposited its instrument of ratification to the optional protocol to the Convention on Rights of the Children, on the sales of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. We will be submitting the instrument of ratification to the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the involvement of children in armed conflict within the coming weeks. Mr. President, we join the international community in reiterating the call for the lifting of the economic embargo imposed on Cuba. We commend Cuba's resilience and urge the United States of America to take the initiative and normalize relations between the two close neighbors. I also wish to convey my deepest appreciation to Cuba for the training of our medical students. More than 100 Solomon Islands medical doctors have graduated from Cuban medical schools over the years. Solomon Islands also closely follows the outcome of the third referendum in New Caledonia, which took place in December 2021 with an air of uncertainty. Solomon Islands subscribed to Resolution A/AC 109/2022 L22 and supports the call for all relevant parties to ensure that the next steps for the self-determination process are transparent and inclusive. Mr. President, in relation to our successful fight against COVID-19 pandemic, we express our heartfelt gratitude to our partners, including Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and the United States of America, and the United Nations agencies, World Bank, and other multilateral agencies who stood with us and provided us with tremendous support and much needed COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility, as well as bilaterally. Solomon Islands is also extremely grateful for employment opportunities provided by Australia and New Zealand through their respective labor mobility programs to accommodate some of the unemployed 20,000 youths who enter our labor market every year. In conclusion, Mr. President, let me conclude by thanking you again for the theme of this year's General Assembly session. Our world is at a crossroads. It is feeling the strain of divisive elements that can divide us. We must not allow that to happen. We have been weighed down by the COVID-19 pandemic. We are feeling the negative impacts of geopolitical conflicts and wars. The time has come for our world to rally and focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. For the world will be always stronger if we are together. We must foster friendship and solidarity through genuine and durable partnerships. We must commit to work together with each other to ensure we can leave behind a legacy of a more peaceful, just, and brighter world for the younger generations that will come after us. Mr. President, the key questions we must each ask ourselves is: one, what legacy do we as leaders today leave behind for those that will come after us? And two, how do we wish to be remembered by generations that will follow? I am sure we would all wish to be remembered as the generations of leaders that uplifted our world, that united our people and our countries to live together and in peaceful coexistence. Mr. President and fellow leaders, if we can leave a legacy that safeguards the survival and freedom of our future generations, we will have done our jobs well. To God be the glory, great things he has done. Thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister and Minister for National Security and Intelligence, Child Poverty Reduction and Ministerial Services of New Zealand. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency.
Я с большим удовольствием приветствую.
I have great pleasure in welcoming Her Excellency Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister and Minister for National Security and Intelligence, Child Poverty Reduction and Ministerial Services of New Zealand. I invite her to address the Assembly.
Ina mana, ina reo, raurangatira mā, kua hui hui mai nei I tēnei whare nui o te ao. Nā mihi mai aha kia koutou katoa, mai I tōku whenua o Aotearoa. Tuia ki runga. Tuia ke raro, ka rongo to pō ka rongo te ao. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, friends, I greet you in Te Reo Māori, the language of the tangata whenua or First People of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I acknowledge the leaders who are here, gathered in person after a long and difficult period. And as is tradition in my country, I also acknowledge those who have passed. Loss brings with it a chance for reflection. And as leaders between us, we each represent countries and communities who have lost much in these past few years. Through famine, severe weather, natural disasters, and a pandemic. COVID-19 was devastating. It took millions of lives. It continues to impact on our economies and with that, the well-being of our people. It set us back in our fight against the crisis of climate change and progress on the Sustainable Development Goals while we looked to the health crisis that was right in front of us. And while we enter a period now where the crisis is subsiding, the lessons cannot. COVID schooled us. It forced us to acknowledge how interconnected and therefore how reliant we are on one another. We move between one another's countries with increasing ease. We trade our goods and services. And when one link in our supply chain is impacted, we all are. The lessons of COVID are in many ways the same as the lessons of climate change. When crisis is upon us, we cannot and will not solve these issues on our own. The next pandemic will not be prevented by one country's efforts, but by all of ours. Climate action will only ever be as successful as the least committed country as they pull down the ambition of the collective. Now, I'm not suggesting, though, that we rely on the goodwill of others to make progress. We need a dual strategy, one where we push for collective effort, but where we also use our multilateral tools to make progress. And that's why on pandemic preparedness, we support efforts to develop a new global health legal instrument, strengthened international health regulations, and a strong and empowered World Health Organization. It's why we're such advocates of the World Trade Organization and its reform to ensure supply chains remain open and critical goods and services are not subjected to protectionism in times of need. It's why we've worked so hard within the Paris Agreement to see the action we need on climate, while also doing our bit at home, including putting a 1.5 degree warming limit into law, increasing our NDC to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030, and quadrupling our climate finance commitment. Now, whether it's climate, trade, health crises, or seeking peaceful solutions to war and conflict, New Zealand has always been a believer in multilateral tools. We were amongst the founding members of the United Nations as governments of the day recognized the perils of war would only be avoided through a greater sense of shared responsibility. The basis on which this institution was formed remains as relevant today as it was then. But without reform, we risk irrelevancy. Now, there is perhaps no greater example of this than Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Let us all be clear. Russia's war is illegal. It is immoral. It is a direct attack on the UN Charter and the international rules-based system and everything that this community should stand for. Putin's suggestion that it could at any point deploy further weapons that it has at their disposal reveals the false narrative that they have based their invasion on. What country, who claims to be a liberator, threatens to annihilate the very civilians they claim to liberate? This war is based on a lie. But I recognize that for the people of Ukraine who have lost loved ones, their sense of peace and security, their livelihoods, these are all just words. They need us as a global community to ask one simple question: what if it was us? Our ability to answer that question with any confidence that we have the tools as a global community to act swiftly and collectively has been severely undermined. In March, when we most needed the UN Security Council to act in the defense of international peace and security, it could not. It did not fulfill its mandate because of one permanent member who was willing to abuse its privileged position. That was wrong. We will not give up on the ability of our multilateral institutions to stand up against this illegal war or to take on the many challenges we face. These institutions are the ballast we need, but it's a ballast that requires modernization fit for the tumultuous waters we all face. That is why New Zealand was pleased to champion the veto initiative. Not only does it provide an opportunity to scrutinize the actions of the permanent member who cast a veto, the veto initiative gives the whole UN membership a voice where the Security Council has been unable to act. But we continue to call for more than that. For the United Nations to maintain its relevancy and ensure that it truly is the voice of the breadth of countries it represents, the veto must be abolished. Permanent members must exercise their responsibility for the benefit of international peace and security rather than the pursuit of national interest. There are other battles that we continue to wage as a nation, including our call for a global response to the use of nuclear weapons. Our history of championing not just non-proliferation, but a prohibition on nuclear weapons is grounded in what we have witnessed, but also what we have experienced. We are a nation that is both of the Pacific and within it. It was in our region that these weapons of war were tested. Those tests have left a mark on the people, lands, and waters of our home. The only way to guarantee our people that they will be safe from the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons is for them not to exist. That's why New Zealand calls on all states that share this conviction to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Now, some will call such a position naive. Some believe that we are safer as a result of nuclear weapons. In New Zealand, we have never accepted the wisdom of mutually assured destruction. It takes one country to believe that their cause is nobler, their might stronger, their people more willing to be sacrificed. And none of us can stand on this platform and turn a blind eye to the fact that there are already leaders amongst us who believe this. Nuclear weapons do not make us safer. There will be those who agree, but believe it's simply too hard to rid ourselves of nuclear weapons at this juncture. There is no question that nuclear disarmament is an enormous challenge. But if given the choice, and we are being given a choice, surely we would choose the challenge of disarmament than the consequences of a failed strategy of weapons-based deterrence. And this is why we will continue to advocate for meaningful progress on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Progress and consensus that was recently blocked by Russia and represented a backward step to the efforts of nearly every country in the world to make even some limited progress on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. None of this will stop New Zealand's advocacy. We will remain a strong and passionate advocate for efforts to address the weapons of old. But we'll also be an advocate to address the weapons that are new. After all, the face of war has changed, and with that, the weapons used. The tools used to challenge the statehood of others are hidden and more complex. Traditional combat, espionage, and the threat of nuclear weapons are now accompanied by cyber attacks, prolific disinformation, and manipulation of whole communities and societies. Now, as leaders, we have never treated the weapons of old in the same way as those that have emerged. And that's understandable. After all, a bullet takes a life. A bomb takes out a whole village. A lie online or from a podium does not. But what if that lie, told repeatedly and across many platforms, prompts, inspires, or motivates others to take up arms, to threaten the security of others, to turn a blind eye to atrocities, or worse, to become complicit in them? Then, this is no longer a hypothetical. The weapons of war have changed. They are upon us and require the same level of action and activity that we put into the weapons of old. We recognize the threats that the old weapons created. We came together as communities to minimize these threats. We created international rules, norms, and expectations. We never saw that as a threat to our individual liberties. Rather, it was a preservation of them. The same must apply now as we take on these new challenges. In New Zealand, we deeply value our right to protest. Some of our major social progress has been brought about by hekoi or people power, becoming the first country in the world to recognize women's right to vote, movement on major Indigenous and human rights issues, to name but a few. Upholding these values in a modern environment translates into protecting a free, secure, and open internet. To realize all of the opportunities that it presents in the way we communicate, the way we organize, the way we gather. But that does not mean the absence of transparency, expectations, or even rules, if we correctly identify what it is we are trying to prevent. And surely we can start with violent extremism and terrorist content online. On the 15th of March 2019, New Zealand experienced a horrific terrorist attack on its Muslim community. More than 50 people were killed as they prayed. The attack was live streamed on a popular social media platform in an effort to gain notoriety and to spread hate. At that time, the ability to thwart those goals was limited, and the chances of government alone being able to resolve this gap was equally challenging. And so that's why, alongside President Emmanuel Macron, we created the Christchurch Call to Action. The core community has worked together to address terrorism and violent extremist content online. And this important work progresses. We have demonstrated the impact we can have by working together collaboratively. We've improved crisis reactions, stymieing the ability to live stream attacks. We have crisis protocols that kick in to prevent proliferation. We're also focused on prevention, understanding the interactions between online environments and the real world that can lead to radicalization. This week, we launched an initiative alongside companies and nonprofits to help improve research and understanding of how a person's online experiences are curated by automated processes. This will also be important in understanding more about mis- and disinformation online, a challenge that we must, as leaders, address. Sadly, I think it's easy to dismiss this problem as one in the margins. I can certainly understand the desire to leave it to someone else. As leaders, we're rightly concerned that even the most light touch approaches to disinformation could be misinterpreted as being hostile to the values of free speech that we value so highly. But while I cannot tell you today what the answer is to this challenge, I can say with complete certainty that we cannot ignore it. To do so poses an equal threat to the norms we all value. After all, how do you successfully end a war if people are led to believe the reason for its existence is not only legal but noble? How do you tackle climate change if people do not believe it exists? How do you ensure the human rights of others are upheld when they are subjected to hateful and dangerous rhetoric and ideology? The weapons may be different, but the goals of those who perpetuate them is often the same: to cause chaos and reduce the ability of others to defend themselves, to disband communities, to collapse the collective strength of countries who work together. But we have an opportunity here to ensure that these particular weapons of war do not become an established part of warfare. And so, we once again come back to the primary tool we have: diplomacy, dialogue, working together on solutions that do not undermine human rights but enhance them. For those who have not sought out the Christchurch call to action, I ask that you consider it. As with so many of the challenges we face, we will only be as strong as those who do the least. In these times, I'm acutely aware of how easy it is to feel disheartened. We are facing many battles on many fronts, but there is cause for optimism, because for every new weapon we face, there is a new tool to overcome it. For every attempt to push the world into chaos is a collective conviction to bring us back to order. We have the means. We just need the collective will. Mai e toku ukaipo o Aotearoa, kara hui hui mai tātou, nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for National Security and Intelligence, Child Poverty Reduction and Ministerial Services of New Zealand for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif, Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Mohammad Shehbaz Sharif, Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul ya ibadiyallazina asrafu. Qul ya ibadiyallazina asrafu. La taqnutu minar rahmatillahi. Inna Allah yaghfiru zanuban jamia. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, as I stand here today to tell the story of my country, Pakistan, my heart and mind have not been able to leave home. Standing here, I still feel that I am visiting one of the flood-affected areas of Sindh and Balochistan of my country. No words can describe the shock we are living through or how the face of the country lies transformed. I have come to explain firsthand the scale and magnitude of this climate catastrophe that has pushed 1/3 of my country underwater in a superstorm that no one has seen in one's living memory. For 40 days and 40 nights, a biblical flood poured down on us, smashing centuries of weather records, challenging everything we knew about disaster and how to manage it. Even today, huge swaths of the country are still underwater, submerged in an ocean of human suffering. In this ground zero of climate change, 33 million people, including women and children, are now at high risk from health hazards, with 650,000 women giving birth in makeshift tarpaulins. More than 1,500 of my people have been gone from this world in this great flood, including over 400 children. Far more are in peril from disease and malnutrition. As we speak, millions of climate migrants are still looking for dry land to pitch their tents on, with heartbreaking losses to their families, their futures, and their livelihoods gone for long times to come. Early estimates suggest that more than 13,000 kilometers of metal roads have been damaged, over 370 bridges have been swept away, 1 million homes have been destroyed, and another million damaged. More than 1 million farm animals have been killed. 4 million acres of crops have been washed away, stripping the people of their breadbasket, and damage of an unimaginable scale. Mr. President, Pakistan has never seen a more stark and devastating example of the impact of global warming. Life in Pakistan has changed forever. I have visited personally and spent time in every corner of my devastated country. People in Pakistan ask, why? Why has this happened to them? When global warming rips apart whole families and an entire country at this ferocious speed, it is time to ask why, and time to ask not what can be done, but what must be done. The undeniable truth is that this calamity has not been triggered by anything we have done. Our glaciers are melting fast, our forests are burning, and our heat waves have crossed 53 degrees Celsius, making us the hottest place on the planet. And now, Mr. President, now we live through an unprecedented monster monsoon. It is literally a monsoon on steroids, as the UN Secretary General described it most befittingly. It is on steroids. One thing is very clear. What happened in Pakistan will not stay in Pakistan. As the Secretary General so candidly says, hotspots like Pakistan fall in the 10 most climate vulnerable list of countries, but emit less than 1% of the greenhouse gases that are burning our planet. It is therefore entirely reasonable to expect some approximation of justice for this loss and damage, not to mention building back better with resilience and strength. Clearly, the time for talk about action has passed. At this point, I am profoundly grateful that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited Pakistan, where he spent time with climate refugees, with mothers and children in the tents, and repeatedly assured us of his support and assistance. At this point, I want to thank each and every one of the countries that have sent help to Pakistan and their representatives to Pakistan to stand in solidarity with us in our most trying hour. On behalf of my nation, I once again express my sincerest appreciation to all of them. Excellencies, the impacts on the health and wealth of my country are beyond calculation at this point. So my real worry is about the next stage of this challenge, when the cameras would have gone or left this August Assembly, and the story just shifts away to conflicts like the Ukraine. My question is, will we be left alone, high and dry, to cope with a crisis which we did not create? not of our doing. Where from and how to begin with to rehabilitate and reconstruct after the rescue and relief effort, which is still going on for 12 long weeks. For many of the lives we have saved, the future is dimmed by new fragility, lost homes, decimated livelihoods, deluged croplands, permanent food insecurity, and exposure to uncertain futures. Some 11 million people will be pushed further below the poverty line, while others will drift to cramped urban shelters, leaving little room for climate-smart rebuilding. Mr. President, for now, we have mobilized all available resources at our domain, squeezing resources from left and right towards the national relief effort, and repurposed all budget priorities, including development funds, to the rescue and first order needs of millions, cash transfers to the most affected 4 million women, heads of household, had begun weeks ago via our social security program, the Benazir Income Support Program. It has been established in the name of former late Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. And her son is our foreign minister today. 70 billion rupees, or almost $300 million from our own pocket, we are spending on this program. But at this point, the gap between our urgent needs and available resources is increasing by the day and amplified by the sheer unprecedented scale of this disaster. Our manpower and resources are totally overwhelmed and overstretched. The question to raise here is quite simple. Why are my people paying the price of such high global warming through no fault of ours? We have no contribution in this. Nature has unleashed her fury on Pakistan without looking at our carbon footprint, which is next to nothing. Our actions did not contribute to this. The dual cost of global inaction and climate injustice are having a crippling effect on both our treasury and our people, right here, right now, over there. Mr. President, this is going to be a long haul, and under these most trying circumstances, hope is the best enemy of darkness. And Pakistanis are known to be exceptionally resilient people. For my part, I am fully committed, fully geared to fighting this battle for our survival in the tents, in the trenches with my people until we have rebuilt Pakistan to face the growing challenges of this century. It is high time we took a pause from the preoccupations of the 20th century to return to the challenges of the 21st century. The entire definition of national security has changed today, and unless the leaders of the world come together to act and act now on an agreed common agenda, there will be no earth to fight wars over. Nature will be fighting back, and for that, humanity is no match at all. Mr. President, Pakistan's urgent priority right now is to ensure a rapid economic growth and lift millions out of poverty and hunger. To enable any such policy momentum, Pakistan needs a stable external environment. We look for peace with all our neighbors, including India. Sustainable peace and stability in South Asia, however, remains contingent upon a just and lasting solution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. At the heart of this long-standing dispute lies the denial of the inalienable right of the Kashmiri people to self-determination. India's illegal and unilateral actions of 5th August 2019 to change the internationally recognized disputed status of Jammu and Kashmir and to alter the demographic structure of the occupied territory further undermined the prospects of peace and inflamed regional tensions. India's ruthless campaign of repression against Kashmiris has continued to grow in scale and intensity. In pursuit of this heinous goal, New Delhi has ramped up its military deployments in occupied Jammu and Kashmir to 900,000 troops, thus making it the most militarized zone in the world. The serial brutalization of Kashmiris takes many forms: extrajudicial killings, incarceration, custodial torture and death, indiscriminate use of force, deliberate targeting of Kashmiri youth with pellet guns, and collective punishments imposed on entire communities. In a classic settler colonial project, India is seeking to turn the Muslim-majority Jammu and Kashmir into a Hindu territory through illegal demographic changes. Millions of fake domicile certificates have been issued to non-Kashmiris. Kashmiri land and properties are being seized. Electoral districts have been gerrymandered, and over 2.5 million non-Kashmiri illegal voters fraudulently registered. All this is in blatant violation of Security Council's resolutions and international law, particularly the 4th Geneva Convention. For our part, the Pakistani people have always stood by our Kashmiri brothers and sisters in complete solidarity and will continue to do so, no matter what, until their right to self-determination is fully realized in accordance with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. I assure the World Forum and this August platform that we in Pakistan remain consistent in our commitment to peace in South Asia. India must take credible steps to create enabling environment for constructive engagement. We are neighbors and we are there forever. The choice is ours, whether we live in peace or keep on fighting with each other. We have had 3 wars from 1947 onwards, and as a consequence, only miseries, poverty, unemployment increase on both sides. It's now up to us to resolve our differences, our problems, our issues, like peaceful neighbors through peaceful negotiations and discussions, and save our scarce resources for promoting education and health and employment to millions of people, young boys and girls on both sides of divide, and not waste our resources in buying more ammunition and trying to promote tension in this area. I think it's high time that India understands this message loud and clear, that both countries are armed to the teeth. War is not an option. It is not an option. It is not an option. Only peaceful dialogue can resolve these issues so that the world become more peaceful in times to come. Mr. President, Afghanistan today presents a unique challenge. 30 million Afghans are left without a functional economy. and banking system that allows ordinary Afghans to make a living, to be able to build a better future. Pakistan would also like to see Afghanistan, which is at peace with itself and the world, and which respects and nurtures all its citizens without regard to gender, ethnicity, and religion. Pakistan is working to encourage respect for the rights of Afghan girls and women to education and work. Yet, at this point, isolating the Afghan interim government could aggravate the suffering of the Afghan people who are already destitute. Constructive engagement and economic support are more likely to secure a positive response. A peaceful, prosperous, and connected Afghanistan in our collective interest. As a neighbor, Pakistan has a vital stake in peace and stability in Afghanistan. We have led the humanitarian efforts to help our Afghan brothers and sisters. We must avoid another civil war, rising terrorism, drug trafficking, or new refugees, which none of Afghanistan's neighbors are in a position to accommodate. Pakistan urges the international community to respond in a positive way to the UN Secretary General's appeal for $4.2 billion in humanitarian and economic assistance to Afghanistan. Release Afghanistan's financial reserves, essential to revive its banking system. Pakistan shares the key concern of the international community regarding the threat posed by the major terrorist groups operating from Afghanistan, especially ISIL-K and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, as well as Al-Qaeda, ETIM, and IMU. They all need to be dealt with effectively and comprehensively. With the support and cooperation of the interim Afghan authorities. In turn, the international community should address Afghanistan's dire humanitarian needs. Mr. President, Pakistan strongly condemns terrorism in all its forms and shades and manifestations. Terrorism does not have a religion, ladies and gentlemen. It is based on dogma, fueled by poverty, unemployment, deprivation, injustice, and ignorance, and fanned by vested interests. Pakistan is the principal victim of terrorism. Over the last 2 decades, we have suffered more than 80,000 casualties and over $150 billion in economic losses due to terrorist attacks. Our armed forces, with the support of our people, mothers, traders, students, teachers, engineers, doctors, have broken the back of terrorism within Pakistan, yet we continue to suffer terrorist attacks from across our borders, sponsored and financed by our regional adversary. We are determined to defeat such cross-border terrorism. And I must say loud and clear that the amount of sacrifices Pakistan has made to defeat terrorism over the period of time has been unprecedented in the contemporary history of Pakistan. I tell often to my friends, if you see somebody, a mother or a child or a boy limping on the streets of Pakistan, maybe he was a victim of terrorists years back. That is the kind of sacrifice Pakistan has paid. Our generals, our soldiers, our doctors, mothers, teachers, students, and traders, they all paid their lives for Pakistan's well-being and defeated terrorism. And this peace which was restored back in Pakistan after great sacrifices is not only for Pakistan, it is a peace for global countries and global community. And we are very proud of it. And this is the biggest manifestation of our commitment, our concern and our continued efforts to defeat terrorism wherever it is. Mr. President, Islamophobia is a global phenomenon. Since 9/11, suspicion and fear of Muslims and discrimination against them have escalated to epidemic proportions. The officially sponsored campaign of oppression against India's over 200 million Muslims is the worst manifestation of Islamophobia. They are subjected to discriminatory laws and policies, hijab bans, attacks on mosques, and lynchings by Hindu mobs. I am particularly concerned by the calls for genocide against India's Muslims by some extremist groups. Earlier this year, this assembly adopted a landmark resolution introduced by Pakistan on behalf of the OIC, designating 15th March as the International Day to combat Islamophobia. It's my sincere and ardent hope that this should lead to concrete measures by the UN and member states to combat Islamophobia and promote interfaith harmony. Mr. President, Pakistan is deeply concerned by the numerous conflicts across the Middle East, including in Syria and Yemen. We support all possible efforts to promote their peaceful resolutions. We call on Israel to put an immediate end to the blatant use of force and flagrant violations of human rights of the Palestinian people and the repeated desecration of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque. The only just, comprehensive, and lasting solution of the Palestinian question is the acceptance of a viable, independent, and contiguous Palestinian state with the pre-1967 borders and Al-Quds Al-Sharif as its capital. Mr. President, the Security Council and the General Assembly must be empowered to play their respective roles under the UN Charter. The Security Council must be expanded by adding 11 new non-permanent members to make it more representative, democratic, transparent, effective, and accountable. Adding new permanent members will paralyze the Council's decision-making, enlarge its representational deficit, and create new centers of privilege in violation of principle of sovereign equality of member states. The nations of the world must step back from the precipice. We must restore peace in Europe, avoid a war in Asia, and resolve festering conflicts across the world. We must revive the vision which created the United Nations, a vision which is often blurred by national interest and hegemonic designs. Pakistan is a partner for peace. But, Mr. President, peace can only be ensured and guaranteed when rights of communities who have been suffering over decades and subjugated over decades get their freedom, earn their freedom, and are respected. In this behalf, before I conclude, Mr. President, I would once again repeat at the cost of repetition that we want to have peace with India, but long-lasting, enduring peace can only be ensured and guaranteed through a just and fair solution of Kashmir, providing rights to the people of Kashmir under UN Charter, according to Security Council resolutions, the right of self-determination, and I will be most forthcoming to sit down then and talk to our Indian counterparts to pave the way forward for future so that our generations do not suffer, so that we spend our resources on mitigating miseries, on building structures to face these floods and outbursts of clouds. We are developing societies. We don't have unlimited resources. We must deploy our resources for the well-being of the people, for our children, for their promotion, for their empowerment, for their employment, for health, for education, and make Pakistan, and of course other developing societies must find their own place in community of nations through hard work, untiring efforts, and sacrifice. That is the only way forward. Therefore, we will work with all those committed to the United Charter's principles to restore the vision which created the United Nations and to equip this organization with the capacity to preserve global peace and promote universal prosperity. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Samdesh Aka Mohasena Padei Techo Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Samdesh Aka Mohasena Padei Techo Hun Sen, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, the Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Excellency Shehbaz Sharif on his election as President of the 77th United Nations General Assembly session. At the same time, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to His Excellency Abdullah Shahid for his efforts in leading the work of the 76th UNGA session during a very tumultuous time. Our theme of the 77th UNGA session, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges, is indeed relevant to the current context. Global uncertainties have been exacerbated by the escalation of armed conflicts, arms race, the rise of mini security alliances, technology and trade wars, the imposition of economic sanctions, and the mounting threats to multilateralism. In fact, the war in Ukraine has complicated not just international relations in Europe, but caused serious economic disruptions and exacerbated our food and energy security. The escalation of the hostilities involving more and more actors, directly or indirectly, and with no end in sight, coupled with the threat of a nuclear war, have serious impacts on the world at large. The situation in the Korean Peninsula remains alarming due to preparation for a 7th nuclear test this year. North Korea has launched dozens of ballistic missiles in response to military drills. In addition, the US-China tension over the Taiwan issue has also posed a concern. Overall, in this very challenging environment, as a country that has experienced a hard-earned peace in our own history, Cambodia is making great efforts to engage constructively with the United Nations in upholding international peace and security, as well as promoting respect for the fundamental principles and values of the UN Charter and international laws. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the present gathering reflects remarkable success of our collective efforts to overcome the unprecedented pandemic. Yet, the battle against this global health crisis is not yet over. New forms of variants and other infectious diseases are emerging. What else could come out in the future? A strong global health system, particularly the World Health Organization, with its central coordination role, could assist in building up a resilient and sustainable national health system. An open and transparent multilateral engagement in the distribution of vaccines, driven by a true principle of shared responsibility, is the only way to prepare for and prevent future pandemics. Coupled with the sharing of lessons learned and best practices, the transfer of technologies in vaccine research and development. Besides that, the existential threat facing humankind is also our vulnerability to climate change. We need to change the process of addressing the climate change issues today, not tomorrow. It has been 50 years already since governments were warned about changing our production and consumption patterns to avoid disaster. Sadly, ever since, we only see more losses of biodiversity, more land degradation, and a growing scarcity of fresh water. Our collective action must focus on global mitigation efforts to promote climate resilient development. Our commitment to lowering the global temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius requires dedicated climate financing and technology transfer to facilitate meaningful transition in mitigation and adaptation efforts. The Glasgow outcomes adopted at the COP26 must be implemented with great urgency, bearing in mind the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Moreover, the threat of the trade and economic decoupling arising from the US-China rivalry will certainly dampen the prospects for global growth. Therefore, the fundamental transformative solution of social, economic, and political process is to strengthen the rules-based multilateral trading system with the World Trade Organization at its heart that can promote an open international trade, reduce trade barriers, and ensure the resilience of regional and global value chains. Meanwhile,